Okay, can you hear me? You got the mic on? Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We are getting ready to start today's program.
As George Washington prepared to historically step down after 2 terms as the first president of the United States, he prepared words for his fellow countrymen. Fearing that he could die in office and begin a precedent of president for life, he intentionally left power. Yet he worried about the nascent country, specifically about the detrimental effects of regionalism, partisanship, and foreign entanglements. Listen to his words. The unity of government, which constitutes you one people, is also now dear to you. It is justly so, for it is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, the support of your tranquility at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, of that very liberty which you so highly prize. But as it is easy to foresee that from different causes and from different quarters much pains will be taken, many artifices employed to weaken in your minds the conviction of this truth, as this is the point in your political fortress against which the batteries of internal and external enemies will be most constantly and actively, though often covertly and insidiously, directed. It is of infinite moment that you should properly estimate the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness, that you should cherish a cordial, habitual, and immovable attachment to it, accustomizing yourselves to think and speak of it as of the palladium of your political safety and prosperity, watching for its preservation with jealous anxiety, discountenancing whatever may suggest even a suspicion that it can in any event be abandoned, and indignantly frowning upon the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest, or to enfeeble the sacred ties which now link together the various parts. Shifting to his great skepticism of political parties, Washington goes on. I have already intimated to you the dangers of parties in the state, with particular reference to the founding of them on geographical discriminations. Let me now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. This spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its root in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists under different shapes in all governments, more or less stifled, controlled, or repressed. But in those of the popular form, it is seen in its greatest rankness and is truly their worst enemy. The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual, and sooner or later the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation, on the ruins of public liberty.
Well, we're really proud of starting our programs off with art. And we feel like that's a way to have a more open mind to explore sometimes contentious, many times deep topics of substance. And so I hope you appreciated President Washington's words from a very historic speech. It's actually read in the Senate every year as a reminder of why we serve. And I think that's a wonderful tradition. I'm Steve Miska, Executive Director of First Amendment Voice. Thank you for joining us today. We talked a little bit about this, the subjects of regionalism that Washington mentions, of partisanship, of portions of the country being pitted against each other. I mean, those are 200 years ago, but they still feel pretty relevant today. And I think it's creating a lot of anxiety today. And it doesn't matter what side of the ideological spectrum you're on. All the polling is showing we are anxious as a country. And so what First Amendment Voice is all about, what our tagline means, citizenship is not a spectator sport, is all about, it's up to us. It's up to us to push back against the fear and the fear-mongering or the apathy sometimes that we find out there. And so anyway, thank you for being here, because by virtue of you being in the audience, it probably signals that you are an active, engaged member of your community. You're an active citizen. And I call it preaching to the choir. I know you're going to get a little bit more of that from some of our speakers today, but when we talk about, when First Amendment Voice, when we say, be engaged, find where your talent is most relevant to meet the needs of your community, we tend to affirm what you all are doing in your communities, right? And we connect you with other people who are doing that in communities across the country. We've got people from California, we've got YouTube live audience listening in today. I do want to make a plug for our audience on YouTube that you are welcome to ask our speakers questions as well. We've got somebody monitoring from Texas who will let us know where the questions are, and I'll talk to the moderators, and if they're able to get a question in, we will work that as well. We try to make our programming as interactive as possible, and we really believe that we learn just as much from our audience as hopefully we present back to you to think about. Actually, how many people are attending our National Symposium for the first time? Please raise your hands. Okay, thank you for being here. How about more than 3 times? All right, we got a few of you. How about 5 times? All right, thank you very much, thank you. Unfortunately, we had to do it virtually for the last 2 years. And the last time we did it in person was in Washington, D.C. We kept getting beat up because we love the Constitution Center. We came here 3 years in a row, and a lot of our D.C. audience kept saying, please, can't you bring it to Washington? And so we did, with the intention that we were going to come back here, and then COVID hit and everything went virtual. So now we are in a hybrid format. We've made the decision, of course, because of COVID, we were doing all virtual programming, but even now when we're in person, we want to reach our digital audience. And so we're very grateful to the support of our sponsors for making that happen. Glass River Media came in from Washington, D.C. to actually produce this. And so you will be part of the production. I just want you to know we're live. The speakers all know. But if you ask a question, and I please encourage you to ask questions, we'll capture that, and maybe you'll be up on a video at some point. as part of asking, a thoughtful question of these amazing speakers who will introduce. But I'm grateful to our title sponsors, Global Peace Foundation, Veterans for American Ideals, We the Veterans. Both of those organizations, along with First Amendment Voice, have joined a coalition called Vet the Vote. And the coalition is trying to encourage 100,000 veterans and/or their family members to volunteer to serve as poll workers. It is anticipated there's going to be a shortfall of 130,000 poll workers across the country in the coming election. And wouldn't that be a shame if somebody couldn't vote or felt like they couldn't vote, either because the lines were way too long or the polling station near where they lived wasn't even open because of a lack of volunteers. And so veterans, having taken off their uniform, want to continue to serve in some capacity. And so we felt like we would join our colleagues at We the Veterans, at Veterans for American Ideals, and try to encourage the veteran community to step up and once again serve their country. And we are super excited. I know we hit 55,000 just last week, so we are over halfway to the goal, and we're grateful for our sponsors for being here in support. Of course, we've got FIRE here. They are based right down the street. The Foundation on Individual Rights and Expression. They have been just a wonderful partner and sponsor along with us for years now in Philadelphia. We have the International Religious Freedom Secretariat, Ursula Inc., who just did a wonderful virtual webinar that featured the role of women in extremism. And looking at that, we try to use different lenses by which to view our theme, which is the American experiment at risk. And today's lens is going to be very much on veteran civic engagement and where are we in that space across the spectrum. And we're also going to look at religious freedom issues in the veteran and service member communities and what's going on there. I'm also grateful to the sponsors that are back in California. We actually have Tyler Bowden, who is in the green room. I think he's hanging out the wings over there, but he flew in from the San Clemente Rotary Club to be here to support the Chamber of Commerce, St. Andrews by the Sea, and Kern Berry, our facilitator, who most of you are familiar with, who runs the Difficult Conversations workshop and just creates an amazing interactive environment where people go away having learned a little bit about themselves, but also inspired to be willing to interact with those with whom they disagree and to prioritize important relationships in their life over being right. I would like to just mention that you've got the program that our team put together for today, or you should have it. If you don't, we can get you a copy. But on the program, there's a QR code. And if you scan the QR code, you will see all the speakers' biographic information and their headshots. And so as we introduce speakers, if you want to learn a little bit more about them, please go scan that and check them out. Today September 17th, marked the 235th anniversary of the signing of the American Constitution. And that's why we come to Philadelphia or DC or in the virtual sphere every year in September. It's always on or around September 17th to celebrate that day. And so I hope President Washington's words help us think about some of the issues. And where is Ed Hamilton at? Ed, please stand up. This is the man behind George Washington's words right there. Thank you very much. We were looking for a voiceover actor. We've worked with Ed before, and as my daughter, who actually edited the video, Heather, said, what the perfect tone. And the team grabbed that contemporary imagery to get us to think, maybe these issues have been around for a while, and maybe it's not as bad as it ever has been. Maybe we're not trending in directions we'd like, but That's what we're going to explore today. And we're going to look at some of these trends where we might be able to contribute our individual talents to help make a difference in our community, maybe help bridge some divides, maybe meet a need where it's at. So I hope you enjoy our program. I'm excited. This is the 7th symposium that we've done now with First Amendment Voice, and I am grateful for you being here. I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, Major General retired Clifford Stanley. Now, he retired from the Marine Corps after 33 years. He's still serving. You might notice when I call him up on stage, he's not in a military uniform. He's in clergy attire, having just come from a funeral. And we are grateful, sir, for you being here. He has done almost everything there is to do in the Marine Corps, and I'm not going to go through the whole bio. You can scan it and look at it. I would like to point out that he was sworn in as the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness in 2010 and served in that capacity. So he has served at the national level, across the globe, in Washington, D.C. He has done just amazing work, and he continues to serve here in the greater Philadelphia area as a minister. And you all might remember former Mayor Wilson Goode, who has addressed us in Philadelphia before, but I know the former mayor is one of your mentors, sir, and we are just grateful to hear your words today. He is no stranger to Philadelphia. He's no stranger to service, and I'm not going to go through all your medals because there are too many awards and all that stuff. You can read about it. I think it's more important to hear your words. So please, ladies and gentlemen, Major General retired Clifford Stanley.
Good afternoon. Well, first of all, even though I have this little notebook with me, I had funeral information in it, and I had to transfer a couple of pages over to make sure that I had the right notes here, but I'm not going to read the notes. I only have one quote that I want to quote at some point as we're talking today. I want to thank you again for the invitation. I'm honored to be here, and I think it's important to kind of set the stage a little bit about my psyche, about who I am, how I serve, which although I am here, I'm actually an executive coach, and I work for the Worldwide Association of Business Coaches, so I'm doing this like all over the world. So it's not just in America, it's like everywhere. And I also work with executive coaching based out of Atlanta, Georgia, so I do some different things there too. So I keep a busy schedule. But I want to give you a personal story that sort of sets the stage for being engaged. I joined the Marine Corps after finishing college in 1969, so you can start doing the math. That's an old guy up there. I PT, that's physical training, every day. Okay, I just want you to know that. I do still exercise, I still work out. Doctor says you're in pretty good shape for a guy your age. I feel pretty good. But my college sweetheart, who is now my wife, was a victim of a racially motivated shooting after my 5th year in the Corps. We were stationed at the Naval Academy. It was a random shooting. We're still married. We've been married for 51 years now. She's paraplegic. She was paralyzed when she was shot. We're talking about service now because I want to share that background with you to understand that I love my country. But I also knew that and this is kind of like the title of where I'm going, you really don't know what you don't know. But it's sometimes even harder when you don't know that you don't know. I want to say that again. It's even harder when you don't know that you don't know. There's a level of arrogance that exists not only in the world today, but as I started seminary, I found out it was going on a long time ago. The level of arrogance where people actually think that because they are the authority, because I have my tribe, because of where I'm from, who I am. I'm going back to my story now of the person who shot my wife. He's deceased. This is before mass shootings were popular. His name was Michael Edward Perch. They killed him. He went around the corner and shot somebody else. He killed my uncle, who was a chemist. We were leaving, it was on a Sunday afternoon. You can look it up. April 13th, 1975 is when it happened. Had a nice dinner at my brother's house with the family, my uncle, Connie Stanley, also graduated from school where I did in South Carolina. But what happened was, when the incident took place, at that point I was almost getting ready to get out of the Marine Corps anyway. It wasn't like I was tired of it. It was just that I was going to transition and do some other things. You know, if you've served, you know what I mean. You always get the itch. The itch never leaves you. You can be in 5 years, you can be in 6 years, you can be in 10 years, you can be in 11 years, 15. I don't care where you are. If you're healthy sometimes, you just kind of get the itch to look. But what ended up happening was, after my wife was hurt, I found a community that embraced me. This is the core that I didn't expect. I honestly didn't expect it. When I joined the Marine Corps, and you know, the different services have different ethnic and racial backgrounds. In the Marine Corps, when I joined in the officers, there were about 22,000 officers. There were fewer than 100 that looked like me. Understand that. This is the time, 1969. There were 2 lieutenant colonels, African Americans. Never had there been a colonel or a general. And so I was getting ready to get out. But then I saw something else. Again, you don't know when you don't know, but it's even worse when you don't know and don't realize you don't know. This light bulb, I'm just saying, the things started opening up. I started seeing things that I hadn't seen before. I started seeing a world that I hadn't seen before. And I recognized at that time that, hey, you know, you kind of live in a cocoon here. Even in seminary, I found out there are things I didn't know. And then I understood even better how with humility you can learn even more. And then guess what? When you just show the ambiance of just caring about other people, the big C, caring, loving, use that word. There was a commandant that we had, our 13th commandant of the Marine Corps. His name is John A. Lejeune. He was the 13th commandant of the Marine Corps, but he used a word that people would say doesn't fit the machismo. He said love. He did. He said, I love my Marines. Just said love. But guess what? As soon as you start embracing that love quotient, that love stuff, what ends up happening is that you start loving people when they don't love you. Guess what? I'm serious. You end up getting off your high horse, because I never had the luxury of being a person who could just go around ordering people. People thought when I joined my church that because of my background, I was used to giving orders. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing. You got to be kidding me. I had to convince people. I had to show them. I had to show up and not show out, but literally be there because I cared, because I loved them. Now, I may not have used the word I love you all the time, but I definitely did, and they knew it. They knew it. Even when we had what they call non-judicial punishment, office hours, when a person messed up. People mess up too. When it happens, you can still show your love by how you talk with them, how you treat them, how you deal with them. Now, I'm going someplace with this because I'm talking about this great nation of ours. I love it. In spite of the fact that I've seen things, not only just lately, but I kind of knew a long time ago, but I didn't know that I knew. I did not understand some of the things I was seeing when I was growing up. I didn't. I didn't understand racism. I didn't. Got news for you. I still don't. So I understand I don't. It's shameful that People don't like you. They don't even know you, and they don't like you. That's kind of heavy when you think about it. I don't know you, but I don't like you because of whatever your reason is. Now, that goes into gender. That goes into your height, your weight, shoe size. You can pick your category. Eye color, I don't care what color. There are reasons people don't like you. But I want to read this quote to you, if I didn't lose the paper. Did it fall? Oh, there it is. Okay, that's the only thing I wanted to read, just one quote. And the quote fell on the floor. Thank you so much, Steve. And the quote is, if a man knows precisely what he can do to you, or what epithet he can hurl against you, in order to make you lose your temper or your equilibrium, then he can always keep you under subjection. I want to say it again because I want you to just think about those words. And these are my words, by the way. Dr. Howard Thurman gave me these words. And I keep looking at these words over and over again. If a man knows precisely what he can do to you, or what epithet he can hurl against you, in order to make you lose your temper or your equilibrium, then he can always keep you under subjection. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about that. Now, when I joined the Corps, I joined a group of guys, and we played poker. I am the worst poker player in the world. I don't play now, but what I'm saying is I can't play very well because if I had a royal straight flush, you could see it on my face. Yes! Oh, Lord, yes! I mean, you could see it. I mean, I was so happy. People started folding right away, and I said, okay, all right, okay, I get it. I just wasn't very good at it. What I'm saying right now, though, is that controlling your emotions, controlling yourself, not cooking off just because someone else gets upset, understanding that that really is one of the key levelers here in what's going on in life in general. I'm upset because you said something that I didn't like, or I didn't or agree with, or something that I didn't quite understand, but I didn't know it, I didn't understand it. Because that also is part of the issue here. I didn't know. Now, we've had people following, people, I mean, what's happening today is not new. Because people have been following people because they follow people. You can do all the things in the world that could be wrong, whatever, but if they're right in your mind, if they're right in your mind, and I'll follow you to the end of the world. That's part of leadership. Hitler kind of broke that cool when he said that. And we have a little bit of that going on in America today. I say vote, but I can't tell you how to vote. I don't even want to tell you how to vote. But I served with people that I loved who didn't like me. That's kind of hard, isn't it? Served with them to the point that I would give my life for them. And I still have to prove my bona fides. And if you didn't do what they did, then you still have to step up and prove something to someone. And even if you serve, there are people who still have their doubts. I made general, and then what happened was one of my officers came to me one day in tears because a person asked him, what's it like working for a black general? Now, let me explain to you that at the time, I was the only African-American general in the Marine Corps, the only one. That didn't make me better than anybody else. I never had the luxury. Never. First of all, my wife would remind me of that. If you met her, you'd understand in about 2 seconds. You definitely understand that one of the first things she told me when we got married, this is before the accident, I don't shine shoes and I don't iron uniforms. I just want you to know that. We went together for a long time, though. We went together for 6 years before we got married, met in college. But this love quotient helps to break down this stuff that we have in our hearts to help us know that we don't know, to help us know that we don't know. And the quotient is humility. I'm now, I just left church, so I'm going to have to say Philippians 2, 3 and 4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but to view others as being more important than you. Put them first. Your attitude should be like that of someone who's humble, regardless of what your religious orientation happens to be, when you put the others first, when you work as a group, when you work as a team, you don't always agree with each other when you're working together. That doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. You're having illusions or delusions of grandeur when you're thinking that you're working together with a group of people. If no other reason than the DISC quotient, if you've taken those personality assessments, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Or Myers-Briggs. We're all different. We see differently. We think differently. We're motivated differently. You may not know this, but I am an introvert big time. I'm an introvert. And my wife taught me how to be a little bit more of an extrovert. She would do things like, as people would come to our home and visit us, I was the commanding general of 29 Palms, California, and she would always be the one out talking about football and doing different things like that. I kind of stepped back in the background and just kind of listened, kind of shy. And finally, she kind of figured out, she said, I'll come out after you open the door and greet everybody. She broke the code. She got me out of my little shell. Because I'm not going to be the one that's going to even be in a meeting that has to be the one talking all the time. What ended up happening is that in the Marine Corps, I wasn't the one always raising my hand to talk and volunteer stuff. It was just that, first of all, because a lot of times they didn't see me. A lot of times they wouldn't even call on me. But when I'm sitting here working as a team, my attitude was, I don't care who gets the credit as long as we get the job done, the mission accomplished. And so I just whisper the answer to somebody else. They do it. And next thing you know, after X number of years, it kind of catches up. Every unit that he's in, they're like doing this. This is not about me. It's about a nation that is an experiment. I just heard Steve say something about that. You just saw something here on the video about that. An experiment that really means something. I'll put my life on the line for it, still do, because this is not about being timid. When I stand here in this clergy outfit, okay, this is not about being timid. I'll stand in a pulpit and say the same thing, but I also will stand up in front of anybody else, and I do know how to shoot, okay? Seriously, I'm a rifle expert and pistol expert. But that is not, and those are not my weapons. Those are not my weapons. Those are not my weapons. I want to underscore that. My weapon right now is this heart to care and to love and to show other people how to love. And one person can make a difference, let alone a whole lot of folks, but one person can make a difference. And I read that quote to you again because I want you to think about it again. If a man knows precisely what he can do to you and what epithet he can hurl against you in order to make you lose your temper, your equilibrium, then he can always keep you under subjection. You can make me a slave in your own mind, but I'm not going to be your slave. And what they taught me when I went to the National War College, even before then, when Sun Tzu said, if you're at war, if you don't even know you're at war, but you're at war, you are at war. If I've declared war against you, even if you don't know it, you're at war. And so I've known for the entirety of my life that I've been at war. I didn't know that then. I didn't know that then. I know it now, but I'll underscore that I know it now a little bit better because I don't understand all there is to know about what I should know, which is part of humility, it's a part of service. So as a veteran, I happen to be in a different lane right now, but I'm also in the same lane. I'm talking about the gestalt of life. It's a gestalt that consumes us as a people, as a body, that we can all make a difference. We do make a difference if you care and if you love your fellow person. I didn't say man, person. Men, women, everyone. God bless you all, and thank you for your time. Okay. Sure. Okay, so let's have a seat. Okay. Which one?
Whichever one you prefer to sit in. How's my mic doing back there? Can you hear me? Okay, great. So we really encourage questions. We want to make this as interactive an experience as possible for you. And so if you have a question for General Stanley, please raise your hand. Please wait until one of the gentlemen in the wings gets the microphone to you, because we really want the audio quality for our viewing audience. And so it helps to speak into the microphone. And then the last thing I would just ask is if you have a question, please ask a question. We want to, in a relatively succinct way, to allow as many people as possible to ask questions. And sir, I know this is generally kind of rude, but I do need to check my phone, not just to keep us on time, but also because if our live stream audience has questions, I want to give them the opportunity to ask.
Got it.
So I love the emphasis on humility, and it just is something that resonates with, I know a lot of our speakers who think of themselves as servant leaders, a lot of, I'm sure, the audience, and it's just such an impressive message to deliver today. So thank you for that.
All right.
We're really grateful. Any questions out there? All right.
Sir, Paul McCullough. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel and also a minister. So my question to you is, when did you feel the call to ministry, and in what capacities do you do that now?
Okay, and the last part of that, what capacity?
What capacities do you serve at now as a minister, sir?
Okay, got it. So let me just say it like this. Did everybody hear the question, first of all? Did anybody not hear the question? When did I feel the call to the ministry? And in what capacity am I serving in now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when I told a friend, I want to kind of back into that answer. When I shared with a friend who was a chaplain in the Navy, but who served in the Marine Corps to help us out as chaplains, I called him about 4 years ago and I said, hey, I just want you to know I accepted the call. This guy's a good friend. He started laughing. I said, why are you laughing? Well, we knew all along. We were just trying to figure out when you were going to figure it out. Okay? What I'm saying is that what ended up happening, I didn't know that I knew. But even when my wife was hurt, the first thing we did was pray. And here she is paralyzed. And we're like, whoa, we're blessed. Because she was alive, we were together, and we love each other. You know, she's my buddy, she's my friend. But I had a family that had humble beginnings. Church was every bit a part of it. My grandfather was a pastor. One of my father's brothers was a pastor. But that wasn't where I was going to go. That was just it. I experienced a call about 4 years ago, finally, after 10 years as a deacon. Because the other thing is that we moved 19 times in that 33 years. So I never lived any place longer than about 2 years. So I never had a chance to really kind of get those roots of any place. But we were active in the church everywhere we went, but we just moved. And finally, when we settled down here, I was active, and next thing you know, I'm teaching Bible study, I'm leading the men's ministry, I'm in a drama guild, I'm in choirs and things like that. Next thing you know, and then I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, at a business conference. The group size was about like this, people I didn't know. I'm making a presentation, and I started crying. Okay, yeah, Marines cry, all right? So they said, you all right, Cliff? I said, yeah. I think the Lord's talking to me. And that's when the call came, but I didn't realize it until then, even though I was doing it all along. If you go back and look at some videos, literally 20 years ago, I was on the Hour Power with Reverend Robert Schuller. And there are videos there, in uniform, professing my faith to God. But I still didn't think that I would. And in fact, my wife even told me, she said, now, I didn't marry no preacher. That's what she told me. So she said she didn't do shoes and she didn't marry no preacher. So I just stayed in my lane. I hope you understand what I'm saying. I just hope I answered your question. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. First Sergeant, retired. I would just like to know, as a veteran, how do you see the First Amendment playing into the military now?
So as a veteran, how do I see the First Amendment playing into the military now? One of the things you did hear Steve say was that I was the Undersecretary of Defense. First Amendment was like right there. Religious freedoms, okay, right there. Your ability, your right to speak. We weren't speaking politically when we were serving. I never had to declare, nor did I. Always voted, but it was mostly absentee. There are certain things I can't do, couldn't do then anyway, in uniform, which is being a part of demonstrations, things like that, whatever, you know, that voice that we hear a lot about, that we talk about now, that you don't do. Because when I was wearing that uniform, my commander-in-chief was whoever that president of the United States happens to be. And there are laws about what you do there. So those First Amendment rights, those things that we talk about that we hold so dear to, to our just being here, being Americans, being citizens, was important to me then, even more important to me now that I understand more about it. And I exercise those freedoms every day, every day. I'm doing it right now, as a matter of fact. Hope did that answer your question? Okay.
Jim Flynn with Global Peace Foundation. General Samuel, first of all, thank you very much for your very deeply touching remarks. And with your unique perspective and background, my question is, what advice do you have for ways in which faith communities and civil society can be more effective in bridging the current divides and polarization now?
Okay. And just to make sure I heard it right and to make sure everyone heard it, what advice now, based on my position and my background, that I have for faith communities to be more effective as we're now dealing with some of the challenges we have? And that's, first of all, a question that we could spend a day on, and you know it. I'm going to tiptoe into that, but there's a lot to that. We can spend a lot of time there. Part of it, I hope you can see from just my enthusiasm, my passion. I think, particularly in the faith community, we're timid when it comes to speaking the gospel, speaking the truth, because it's not always the gospel in every faith community, so let me qualify that because there are different faith communities. But what I am saying, though, is that speaking the truth, understanding the truth, but I go back to the theme that I was talking about, not knowing that you don't know. I see too much arrogance even in the pulpit, being frank with you. People who wear a collar who think that they're all that in a bag of chips. People who don't walk with humility, but walk with, I got this, I'm in charge. I mentioned that even as a general, I never had the opportunity, nor would I even think about walking around thinking, I got this because I'm a general, or that I'm senior. Because I recognize that all of us are important, and I wouldn't even be there if it wasn't for that private that's there. So I'm serving the private. There's too much that's happening in the pulpit today or the faith communities. We're not serving the people. That's the example that we should be following, is serving those that are there. Now, remember now, I said, this one we could spend a semester on because there's a lot to it. But what I am talking about is leading with your heart to be able to serve the community. Serving in a way that you recognize, even if I stood here right now and I talked about Paul and Thecla, or I talked about something that happened in Thucydides and the Peloponnesian Wars or whatever, and what was happening with Athens and Greece. I may know a lot about those subjects, but I don't know all there is about those subjects. And to be able to convey myself or to talk with people and act like I know everything about it is not right, because I'm going to open the aperture a little bit, because even as I'm talking right now, I'm learning. When do you stop learning? When do you stop approaching? And that I see, particularly in faith communities, is too much of that. So I'm hopeful, I'm prayerful that more of the humility quotient will be there, so that not only just in our faith, so that, people are turned off because what ends up happening, why do I have to go to church or the synagogue or wherever I go
when it's no different there than it is out here. They're the same way. I mean, I've seen more graft, more arrogance, more selfishness in the church. And so people don't go. You know, so there's a lot to the question. Oh, there's a really important question, too. Wow. I mean, so I'm giving you the vein of where I'm coming from, because I'm not afraid of being thrown out of the synagogue or the church. Now, I'm now talking about John chapter 12, verses 42, 43. When they saw him preach and still would not be vocal supportive because they were just afraid of peer pressure. Somebody throwing me out. You're not going to like me, so therefore I'm just not going to say anything. I'm just going to step back and kind of hide in the shadows. That's what's happening right now in our elections. People are just stepping back in the shadow. Listen, I want my friends, and because I want my friends, so therefore I'm just going to step back. We could do a semester, maybe even a year on this one. Thank you, though.
Well, Jim's organization works very much in that space, and they do amazing work. So
Yeah.
thank you for it. We're a little bit behind schedule, but we'll take one more question if anybody has it. Yes, sir.
Anyway, General Stanley, thank you so much. Rachel Robinson, the wife of Jackie Robinson, tells the story of how during his time right after playing baseball, when he became a businessman, he would still confront very serious racism in his daily experience. And she would tell the story that he would come home, and as he had entered into golfing, would take a basket of golf balls behind where their home was. And because those golf balls were white, he would hit them out across whatever field. And that would be the way that he could kind of release some of the energy that had built up based on his experiences in that daily time.
Mm-hmm.
You have given us some history here of your challenges. How did you get through some of those challenging times?
Okay, good. And I'm mindful of the time. Just want you to know that. Did everyone hear the question? Anybody not hear the question? Okay, and I'll be succinct. I'm going to try to be succinct, but also on point. Well, first of all, prayer life has been a constant. That has been a constant for me because it means so much. But then I have these daily habits. I mentioned one of them while I was standing there talking. I actually do exercise. That actually helps, and I mean I push. I'm not talking about like tokenism. I'm talking about I'm drenched by the time I finish doing my exercises, because I do that every day for a lot of reasons now. My family has a history of heart problems, so I know that. And we shared that with our daughter to make sure she knows, so we talk. So I do the exercise, that helps. But I also spend a lot of time, my entire life, which is why my chaplain friend reminded me, he said, well, we knew all along, but you didn't know, waiting for you to figure it out. I was mentoring and helping other people. In other words, I was displacing my stuff by helping other people of all races and all genders across the board. Even though other stuff was happening, I was actually helping. If you pull the cord a little bit, you'll see where it was happening. And so I was excited when the people I mentored became lieutenant generals. The first African-American four-star general worked for me when he was a lieutenant. You understand what I'm saying? I was at his promotion ceremony just a few weeks ago. And so what I'm saying is that stuff continues. And I recognize, last point I'll make, is that I recognized a long time ago, even before I joined the Marine Corps. I was a student body president in college. I'm the student body president at the seminary right now. But I recognized that I had a shelf life. A shelf life. I'm not going to be here forever. I know it.
And so what can I do to make a difference for you and for those people that I love, which is everybody? And that's where my life is right now, serving. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. We are so grateful for you being here. Those words really resonated with me. I know they did with everybody else. Thank you
so
very much.
Yeah, I'm going to run here too. Yeah.
Sounds
okay.
great.
All right, okay. Can I go down this way?
So we're going to take a quick break. Please use the restroom, get some more refreshments. If you would be seated back in here in the next 10 minutes or so, we'll try to stay on track today. Thank you. Okay, before we get started, again, I was remiss in my administrative comments, and I needed to make a couple other points. I hope if you haven't gotten some of these bookmarks that you take a look and take them home. These are for when you read real books. I know a lot of people like the digital stuff, but for those of you, I always take a hard copy book. I'm a faithful steward of the local library wherever I happen to live. And the other thing is a pocket constitution. Please take those with you. You've got all the First Amendment voice stuff right on the back of that, and you can learn more about us. But the one thing I would like to ask of you today is, should you take a photo of yourself, of you with a speaker, getting a chance to talk to them, please share them with us. And the easiest way to do that is to just tweet it out and tag @FirstAmend on Twitter. But if you're not a denizen of Twitter, then you can just email Haley, our comms director. And it's a very easy email. It's comms@firstamendmentvoice.org. But please share those photos. We love crowdsourcing photos of the events that we put on, and we hope to be able to share those with others who weren't able to be here in person, and we'd appreciate that. So it is my pleasure to be able to introduce Larry Rosenberg, the chairman of First Amendment Voice. Larry is a partner at Jones Day in Washington, D.C. He has litigated First Amendment cases up to the Supreme Court, up to state-level Supreme Court, I'm sure districts and all the other levels. So he's just, and he's a good friend and a great moderator. So, ladies and gentlemen, Larry Rosenberg.
Thanks. Steve, if you could stay up here for a sec. And next? Okay, never mind. Just wanted to thank you, Steve, for the lovely introduction. All right. So we had a wonderful, wonderful speaker before us, and I really appreciate that. And we are going to try our best not to completely fall flat after that wonderful presentation. We're going to be doing a panel on veteran civic engagement. And as the general said, one of the greatest attributes we can have is love. And one of the ways to spread the love is through getting engaged and doing things in our communities. And this wonderful panel is going to tell us how to do some of those things. Now, I'm a lawyer, and so I'm used to telling people that anything you say can and will be used against you. But nothing that is said today can and will be used against anybody by First Amendment Voice or our audience. We want to have a wonderful, free, and full discussion. So I'd like to basically just tell you who the panel is, and rather than having me go all effusive about them, I'm going to have them introduce themselves as they speak. And I think what we're going to do is just go in order and have them tell you a little bit about themselves and their stories. We have Paul McCulloch, we have Maura Mo Gillen, we have Councilman David O, and we have Glenn Schatz. And all of them have varied, diverse backgrounds and experiences. And I think it's really going to help us today to understand how we all can become more engaged. So thank you, and we'll turn it over, Paul, to you.
Okay, thank you. So first, I want to thank Larry and Steve for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to speak on this panel with this cast of all-stars. It's really special to be here with all of you today. So I have a lot of different things that I'm involved with. I got a full-time job, 3 part-time jobs, 3 volunteer jobs, but I'm not here to tell you my resume. At the core of who I am, my through line, if you will, is the concept of servant leadership. And in all the different things that I'm involved with, all my different activities, I ask myself a fundamental question. Is this the highest and best use of my time? And the way that I judge that is, can I draw a solid line from this activity to being able to serve and love other people in some way? And if the answer to that is no, this is not the highest and best use of my time. If it's just, a manual labor activity like mowing the grass, like I can get somebody to help me with that, I would rather be out serving in the community in some way. So for me, I want to really get after the idea of taking care of other people. Because at the end of the day, it is not about how much money you have. It's not about how big your house is. It's not about how fast your car is. It's not about any of those things. There's a parable in the Bible, and it talks about 3 people that are given talents. And 2 of those people go out and they use those talents and they invest them. In the Bible, the talents are referring to money. And the other person goes and buries it in the backyard out of fear of making the master upset. And the master comes back and he says, oh, well, you 2 guys that did a really good job, I'm going to double what you had. You that buried your talent in the backyard, I'm going to take away that talent, and I'm actually going to punish you because you knew that seeing your return on investment is important to me. You didn't do anything with your talents. And so from a proverbial perspective, I believe that at the end of the day, when I die, I'm going to get asked 2 questions by the God of the universe. One is, did you or did you not accept the free gift of salvation that was given to you by my son? But more relevant to this audience, Paul, I gave you a whole lot of gifts, special, unique abilities and talents. What did you do with them? Did you love, serve, and care for other people, or did you bury those talents in the backyard? A new friend of mine recently shared with me a poem called The Dash. And it talks about this idea of there's a dash between the day that you were born and the day that you die. And what did you do with your dash? What did you do at the time that you were given? Because like the general said, none of us are immortal. None of us get to hang around forever. So what did you do with your dash? And for me, it comes down to what I call my life verse. And that's John 13:34. And the short version of that is love others as I have loved you. Now that's a very tall order when you put that in perspective, right? If you think about what Jesus Christ did, dying on the cross to save humanity, past, present, and future, from their sins, that is a very big ask of us. So it is not very frequent that you're in a life or death situation where you can literally give your life to save somebody else. But what can you do on a daily basis? The small things to love, serve, and care for other people. That is really a big question. And so for me, I have seen this play out. I host a radio show / podcast called Serving Our Nation. I've been doing that for about the last year and a half. And I've had well over 150 guests on my show at this point. And week after week, guest after guest, I hear re-emphasized 2 things that I already knew, but I get to share it with my listeners. And that is, when you serve other people, there are 2 blessings that come from that. One is the actual act of service, because there is joy in that. When you are serving other people and loving other people and caring for somebody else, there is joy in that because there is a smile on their face as big as the universe. But the second piece is, as a almost afterthought of that service, there is a blessing that comes, almost like an afterthought that comes. It may not be today. It might not be tomorrow. It might be a month from now. It might be a year from now. But I can tell you story after story in my own life, and I share it in my show. I talk about it from the perspective, you reap what you sow. Or from a non-biblical perspective, when you put good into the universe, good comes back to you. And so I've heard that from guest after guest, week after week. And I'm going to share just a couple quick stories about how that plays out in my own life and a couple of other people. So over 6 years ago, my uncle, who is not just my uncle, but a very close personal friend and my mentor for a very long time, and has also served as a sort of father figure for me, he was diagnosed with kidney problems, massive kidney problems. So I think it was like stage 4 at the time of renal failure. And the entire family was tested. His wife, his daughters, ex-wife, sisters, all the above were tested. I was the only one in the family, and I was a perfect match. And at the time, I was still working for the Army. And the Army, if you understand the acronym, Uncle Sam ain't released me yet. That's what U.S. Army stands for. The Army said to me in no uncertain terms, hey, so you are the property of the U.S. government, and you have to get permission from the Army Surgeon General to give a kidney. So it was a long, arduous process of jumping through hoops. And before I could go and do the surgery, I had to sign a document saying, hey, I fully acknowledge and realize bad things could happen to me during the surgery and after the surgery. And if that means I can't perform my duties, the Army has the right to kick me out. And then I had other people tell me, hey, if you do this, that means there's going to be certain limitations in your life. I don't care. I'm signing up. And so, one, there was such tremendous joy right after the surgery. Again, going back to my original statement, when you serve somebody, the person smiles from ear to ear. Their smile can light up a room. And it was so special for me because I saved a human life. Of all the things I've ever gotten to do, I saved a human life. Like, that means something. But then the second thing is, I've now had more than 6 additional years with my uncle. That surgery was May 2nd, 2016. 6 more years that I've still had with my uncle. And he was going through kidney dialysis at the time. And he was not looking good. And it was very evident, either give the man a kidney or watch the man die. So I gave the man a kidney. So serving really starts at home. There was a young man, and he had a disability. And he was not being included. He did not feel loved from his community because he had a disability. He had Down syndrome. And so his father continued to speak words of life into him and continued to give him encouragement and to help him find purpose and value and meaning in his life with the gifts that God gave him. And so he encouraged him to go and do an Ironman triathlon. And so he got a coach, and that coach helped him and inspired him. And when he wanted to give up at the end, his father came alongside him, as did the coach, and continued to speak words of life into him. Serving starts at home. That young man finished, and he was the first person with a disability to finish and be an Ironman triathlon completion. Okay? And the last thing I'll share with you, one of my hats, I have a great opportunity to serve as an adjunct professor at Drexel University. And the subject matter is not really relevant. What really matters to me, I've taught that course 4 times in a row now, 4 semesters. And every single semester, in the end of course feedback, I have students writing on there, and like I have no knowledge of what they say, right? Like I don't know who says what, and it's just an anonymous survey. Every single semester, I have 2 or 3 students that write on there, single best professor I've ever had. And it's not because of the content of the class. It's mildly amusing at best. Okay? It's about I care for them. And from the very first time that we have class together, I say to them, how can I serve you? And I live that out through the entire course of the semester. And when things come up, I tell them, life happens. So when something comes up in your life, come to me, let me know, give me notice, and I will work with you. And throughout the entire course, I emphasize, I beat it into their heads. You have value. You have gifts. The general was talking about he's an introvert. And I did a quick little MBTI thing with people in my class. Half the class is introverts, half the class is extroverts. But I emphasize to them over and over again. It doesn't matter your personality. It doesn't matter your background. All those things that general talked about, not relevant. What matters is that every single person has value, every single person has a voice, and every single person has talents. And when you find those things, that is how and when you can make a difference in the world, you can get involved, and you can be civically engaged. So going back to the 2 questions, to me, when I die and I give that response to the God of the universe, all I want to hear, all I'm ever concerned about is, well done, my good and faithful servant. So that is my prayer for myself, for my students, and for all of you. Thank you, and God bless you.
Paul, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I will note for the audience, if you want to donate a body part, Steve is out back with a hacksaw. You just pick the part and he slices it off. So, but seriously, that was really inspiring. I guess one question I would have is if you had one piece of advice to say a veteran, how can you become more engaged from your perspective, whether it's faith-based involvement or other? what would your one piece of advice be?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I would tell them to really understand who you are and what your giftings are, because there are so many ways that you can get involved. My show talks about having people from all walks of life, military, faith, community, business leaders, and again, something as simple, maybe not as simple, but as fundamental as serving at home. So that would be my piece of advice to them, is just find out how God has wired you. There's all kinds of tests you can take. There's the MBTI, there's Clifton Strength Finders, the list goes on. And it helps you understand how you're wired and what your giftings are and what you would excel at. And then once you find those things out, there's so many organizations that align with all kinds of different giftings. So just figure out who you are, find an organization, or maybe a half dozen, and then get after it.
Great, great. Well, thank you. Mo, why don't we go on to your story for a little bit?
Thanks. First, let me just say I'm delighted to be here at the Constitution Center. And also, you know, among some veterans in this community that I've worked with in the past, we are very, very blessed in the Delaware Valley to have so many veterans who are civically engaged. And I really just feel like I'm sitting here as one of them. My husband's in the audience, and he's also a veteran who's very civically engaged in our community. I want to tell my story focusing on some key words. My favorite word, one of my favorite words in the English language, is how. Things like, how do we get stuff done? But I'm going to pause for a minute and start with why. I like to tell the story that I wore a uniform long before I joined the military. I was a Girl Scout and a Red Cross instructor before I ever went to the military academy at West Point. And even while I was in the service, I was still serving my community in other ways. I earned the MOVSM, the Military Outstanding Volunteer Service Medal, in the year of Desert Storm, because a number of others that I knew were deployed, and I was stuck in a staff job at Fort Monroe, and I wasn't going anywhere, but I could still serve my community that was left behind. And so I put in 240 hours that year serving through Red Cross and Girl Scouts and my church. But I don't think I'm unique. We know that veterans kind of as a group volunteer. Some of that is for a sense of purpose, because we're kind of called to mission. And some of that is also for a sense of belonging, a sense of community, finding our tribe. I remember vividly standing in the gravel at BIAP, Baghdad International Airport, redeploying home from my one deployment. And I was listening to a playlist on my iPod that my brother-in-law had given me, and Rodney Adkins came on, These Are My People. And I'm standing amidst thousands of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and just kind of looking around, yep, these are my people. Fast forward a number of years later, after my service here in Philadelphia as the head of the ROTC at Drexel and some other jobs, and I actually went to vote in a polling place for the very first time. I have a record from New York State telling me that I voted 26 times absentee ballot. I didn't vote in every general election. There were a number of the primaries that I missed. But on a pretty consistent basis, I grabbed that cardstock form with the red printing and sent it off to the Albany County Courthouse to request my absentee ballot. So the first time I actually voted at a polling place and pushed the buttons was really exciting for me. And it was my neighbor Cindy, who was working as the judge of elections, and she took my picture. Now, you're not supposed to take pictures in a polling place, but as the judge of elections, she absolutely understood. And it's not a great photo anyway, it's kind of fuzzy, but there was that moment that's vivid in my mind when I looked around at my neighbors who were serving as poll workers and realized that this was my new tribe. This community where I had settled was kind of my new people. So I'm very active in my community. I have served as a poll worker for a number of years, and I really appreciate the Vet the Vote, but watch out for that Hatch Act, because that'll get you in trouble with the lawyers. I am currently serving as assistant treasurer for the Haverford Civic Association. I also work on the website for Haverford Civic Association. For the Federation of Civics in Lower Merion, I am currently secretary. And if you want to get involved at kind of an introductory level with an organization, I always recommend secretary. I had served as secretary for the West Point Society of Philadelphia for a number of years, and then as treasurer. I also now am co-president of the Central Montgomery County Business and Professional Women, where we have have a specific project outreach for women veterans. And that's sort of the short list. There are others. But back to that word, how. You know, we've talked already about skills, and I do think that military people bring some skills to civic engagement that are really important. We're fairly well organized. We can run events. You know, many of us have been involved in change of command ceremonies and all kinds of other events, and so, you know, we can do things for our communities that bring people together. My background happens to be in public affairs, so, you know, the marketing side of things, I can do social media, and those are some of the skills that I bring to the fight. Using my skills is important. But one of the more important pieces is just showing up. When there are issues that are up for discussion, I tend to show up at our Board of Commissioners meetings in Lower Merion, and if there's an issue that's important to me, I show up at the committee level meetings, and I also show up at the commissions and board meetings. I was there at the Board of Commissioners meeting this past Wednesday night, and I spoke during what they call public privilege of the floor, and I call public responsibility of the floor. To me, government well run, especially at the local level, is a three-legged stool. We have our paid staff, who I'd like to view as public servants. We have our elected officials, and we have the public. And I think as a member of the public, I need to show up, and I need to call out what I don't think is right, in an engaging and non-confrontational way. And I had spoken this particular evening about public comments, how they were being read into the official record. And on my way home, one of the commissioners called me and he disagreed with me. And we had a great little chat. But one of the things he said, and he said this before, is he appreciates my speaking up because I've done my research. And so I think that's part of showing up is, you know, sort of number three. If using your skills, showing up. Number three would be learning about the issues. I am not a fan of Action News. Hank and I do not watch nightly network news. It makes me crazy. It is headlines. It is too dramatic. I want to read the story in the newspaper the next day, and I want to read all the way to paragraph 7, at least. If it's an issue that's interesting to me, I'm not gonna stop at the lead or the bridge. I have to go at least to the 7th paragraph, and I encourage my kids to do that as well. It becomes a little comical. Our son Henry won't vote because he says he's not well read on the issues. I would love for Henry to actually read on the issues, but I understand his point. If you're going to speak up, you have to know what you're speaking up about. So that's kind of my pieces of how, a little bit of what, and why I'm engaged in civic activities within our community. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak to those issues.
Thanks so much, Mo. Let me ask you this question. If there was a piece of advice you would give to women veterans about how to become engaged, what would you tell them?
I love my women veterans. I have a really great group of gals that I hang with periodically. We met as a therapy group at the Vet Center in Norristown, and we've kind of just stayed very close, and we show up at things. And one of the things that my girlfriend Kat does is she always asks for a veteran discount. And initially, I kind of balked at that. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel. I don't need a discount. But I realized that the reaction she was getting was, oh, you're a veteran too. And I think just that piece, hey, do you happen to have veteran discounts, gave an opening to let people know we're veterans too. So I do think that somehow finding a way to get it into the conversation is more important for women. Mathematically, if a woman is carrying an ID card, she's more likely to be a spouse. Women veteran numbers are just smaller. So we have to find ways to have those conversations. I don't know if you see my name tag here, but it says Maura Mo Gillen, U.S. Army retired. Just little ways to work it into the conversation. But if there are women veterans who are interested in getting involved, I do think it starts with showing up and learning the issues and kind of that entree into politics, but there are a lot of great programs available for women veterans. There's a gal at Chestnut Hill College who runs a program called Women Veterans Rock, and very aggressive about enlisting women veterans to run for office and giving them the background and the skills and some of the foundation that they need. So there are some terrific programs out there, and yeah, I think we need more representation. Were you the one speaking earlier about a judge who was, I got a chance to listen to an event on Wednesday where they were, Laurel House, which is a housing for domestic violence victims and families, was honoring my friend Cheryl Austin, who is a retired Navy captain who, after serving as a lawyer, ran for a judge in Montgomery County, and she just finished 10 years serving as a judge with the Common Pleas Court and was our vet court judge. There are incredible positions where women veterans are doing really important work as elected officials, and I absolutely would encourage that.
Well, that's a great segue with elected officials to Councilman. Oh, maybe you could briefly introduce yourself and tell us some of the wise things you have to say.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm the guy who got half a talent, not a whole talent. And that has driven a lot, I think, about how I look at life. What do you do with half a talent? What are you worth? How do you contribute? And I had poor habits. I was pretty much raised in one of our poor neighborhoods in Southwest Philadelphia. And I had lots of bad habits and lots of bad friends. And I often found myself in what I call the land of regret. Oh, I regret. I should have studied. I shouldn't have gone out. I shouldn't have been hanging around. I shouldn't have been doing a lot of things. But I just didn't have discipline. But I had hope. I wanted to be somebody. I wanted to do something. My father was a pastor, and I so much admired him for his authenticity, his commitment. I could not be that man. Went through so many things. But I did find that the best things in my life I did not earn. The best things I received I do not deserve. My wife, my children. If you really think about the best things in your life, there are things that you were gifted. So I wanted to be a lawyer, and it was my dream to be a smart, conscientious person who could bring justice with education, knowledge, and ability. And I did eventually graduate from law school, serve in the DA's office. I did a number of things, many of the type of civic service that we're talking about. But it was because I didn't know how could I fit in. If I could just serve here, do some menial thing, if I could fit in here, help out. I was looking for a way to serve. But the main thing I wanted to do was be an attorney. And I thought I could do good things as an attorney, not only as an attorney, but as someone with a law firm. And I set about that. And every now and then I would run into a problem and I would introspect. Oh, why are things bad? Maybe I did something I'm not aware of. Let me think. What have I done? Did I offend someone, hurt someone, do something? I'd study myself and I'd find the answer and I'd try to make amends and I'd get back to the business of building my law firm, making it successful to do great things. And one day I hit a ceiling and I was stuck and I could not overcome whatever the problem was. And I was thinking deeply about it and I was listening to the radio and they were talking about, in those days, riverboat gambling. Riverboat gambling back in 2001, 2002, was going to come and save Philadelphia. It was going to create all these jobs. It was going to be a miracle. And I said to myself, that's nonsense. Someone should say so. Someone should talk about where do we get jobs from and how do we actually deliver excellent public education in poor neighborhoods. And I was aware of that. Not because I'm a bright guy. I started from the beginning. I'm not a bright guy. But I was very interested in all these things, and I had seen it. And then I thought, God has blessed me with so much that I did not deserve. I did not earn. Maybe what I should do is run for office. I'm going to lose, but I'll run for office. I'll run real hard, and I'll talk about issues like how do we create jobs? How do we improve our community? What could we do for the future? And the great thing is, since I don't know what I'm doing, never did it before, have no support, no backing, no financing, I'll just go out and get clobbered. And that'll be my testimony, my willingness to talk about issues intelligently, intermodal transportation, overseas, global economy, where manufacturing is really the creative arts economy, all that type of thing. I'll go talk about it. And if I do a really good job, the real candidates, the ones backed by the parties, I might interject these ideas into the campaign. And then, after I lose, and I'm all bloody, God will look down and say, good job. Go back to making money and building your law firm. What I had found is somewhere between the time I was a child watching Perry Mason and dreaming of being this lawyer who did good and helped people, I had started to build a golden calf to myself. The law firm David O. That's what I called it, the law firm David O. Building clients, building things, And I said, wow, I've really gone astray from what I really wanted to do. And so I did run for office, and it was a very interesting experience, a very good experience. Gandhi said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they attack you, and then you win. I've been through every one of those stages, and it's absolutely true. From just a blank stare to giggling, laughing, ridiculing, to smearing and attacking, everything. And I didn't win. I ran, I lost, but I did surprisingly well. And then soon after that, I lost my contracts at my law firm. They came in with the truck, took all my files, all that stuff, and I was like really getting spanked. And it came to my mind, 4 years later, I'm going to run again. And 4 years later, I did run again. I had tremendous opposition. I won on election day by, I think, 6 votes. And the next day, they told me they didn't count any absentee ballots, so I lost by 122. And 4 years later, I ran again. And, I was pretty much on my way to losing. And I remember I told my wife, I said, we got to go to this thing. And I just told her, I said, listen, I lost. And, I had told her just before then, the final 2 weeks, I said, listen, we only have $5,000 left, the baby's money. And I said, I'm not asking you to spend the money. I'm just telling you, we put everything into this. The only thing we have left is $5,000 for the baby. My wife said, spend it. And I said, no, I want you to spend it. And it's not because of the money. It's because we want to be 100%. What we want to leave our baby with is giving it our all for what we think is a good thing. It's a better gift than $5,000. But we were broke, and I was going to get run out of town anyway. Everybody's running me out of town. I couldn't have shown my face anywhere. But a miracle happened. I was losing. There was no way I was going to win. Everybody had left my little I don't have celebratory parties. I just, we watch the returns. And, I'm not celebrating anything beforehand. But in the corner, people started getting excited. I think I was losing by 1,500 votes at the end of the night. No way I was going to win. And they got excited because the number went from 1,500 to 1,400 to 1,300. When we hit a flat 1,000, people cheered. And then we got to 500. And then it was 200. Then it was 100. And it was so exciting. I had a friend. He's a much older guy. He lost everything gambling. And he was getting really excited. And I was feeling bad, oh, my God, I'm going to bring back his gambling problem. But anyway, he said, this is so exciting. And to make a long story short, I did win. And I did stay the winner. I just say winning, running, it was a miracle that I won. And it was a miracle that I won again 4 years later. And it was a miracle that I won in just the last time in 2019. I have the Democratic machine against me, the Republican machine against me, the progressive working family. I got everybody against me. And I'm not saying because I'm a great smart guy, nothing like that. I'm just saying that sometimes there's something for you, but you got to try. You got to believe that what you're going to do is a good thing. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. We just try. And I think for veterans, you have served. However you served our nation, not our city or our county or one group of people over it. You've served our nation. And the ideals, there's no perfect nation, but the good ideals, all the people, you have something to bring to our government and to our democracy and to our republic, those ideals, and to the world. Democracy and freedom doesn't exist in a vacuum. And from my little corner here in Philadelphia, I have something to contribute. What I really think about is this, and maybe this will resonate with you as well. What is a great community? What is a wonderful city? Is it the buildings? Is it streets paved with gold? I think it's the people and how fulfilled they are and how honestly and justly they're treated. And if there's wonderful opportunities and equal opportunities and justice in public education and things like that, wouldn't we love to be in this city? And wouldn't we love each other? And this thing that we're talking about now, just the polarization and how we hate other people's opinions and hate their label, and how a label will describe everyone to the extent we just do away with them, protest them, disregard them. I think it's terrible. We're no longer in an era where we can talk about reason and reasonable. I'll leave with this. There are 1,600,000 people in this city, over 1 million voters. Next year, when people vote for mayor, only 300,000 people will vote, for and against whomever. It doesn't matter. 1.3 million people won't vote. Some of them can't vote. But most of the people who don't vote are in the center. They're the ones who will hear you and talk with you and be tolerant of you. The most enthusiastic people are at the ends. They're very clear. And that's fine. I'm not against being clear, being on this end or that end. I'm just saying, but what happened to the middle? If the most polarizing people are the only ones who get excited about the election, they're the only ones who put money into candidates, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. That is what you shall have. We are challenged to get people in the middle who are tolerant and who want to have common ground to come out. I think veterans, very much so, fill that gap, and I hope veterans will come out. And in addition to all the wonderful ways of volunteering, because everybody hates politics, put on that uniform of public service, sacrifice yourself with that miserable thing called politics, and get engaged. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That really is an amazing story, and I didn't realize you had gone through the complete travails of the political process. That really is amazing. Do you have any practical advice, if there are any veterans, either in our audience here or listening in, who say, yeah, I do want to get involved in politics. I'm not ready to run for office, but I'd like to do something. What would you tell them they could start out doing?
Get engaged at whatever level you can. As you said, we need people to be at the polls. Listen, if you're in Philadelphia, you get paid for it. You don't get paid a lot, but you'll get paid for it. But if you're working the polling places, if you're helping people vote, if you're just smelling the air and being in the environment, you'll learn something. If there's an issue that you're interested in, get involved in the issue. It doesn't matter. You have your opinion. Nobody else's opinion matters. Just your opinion, what you think is right. You don't have to run for office, but I'm just going to say, if you have something to contribute, don't be deterred. There's a lot, I hate to say it this way, I'm just going to say it. There's a lot more stupid people holding office than you. So you might as well get out there. You'll be surprised who gets these positions because nobody tries. Like, try. Give it a shot. Look, you don't get it. Is that going to be a big deal? It isn't. It isn't a big deal. Offer something. And I would also say this. If you only do what you can do, where is the magic? Reach for something you can't even grasp, and you will get it. And it'll be a wonderful part of your life. The testimony. The testimony is to do in your life, in word and deed, that is beyond your ability to do. And if you're a faithful person, that's what the faithful life is. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you. Glenn, maybe you can tell your story and inspire us as well.
Sure. It's hard to follow all of my fellow speakers, but I'll give it a shot. So I didn't know it at the time, but I was called to service relatively early in my life. My mother was an immigrant. My grandfather on my father's side was an immigrant. I didn't know until recently. I always thought he was an orphan, but my grandfather served in World War I. My father served in World War II. And even though they both only served for a couple of years, not really by choice, the stories that I was told growing up by my father was around what that service meant to him. I never met my grandfather, but what that service meant to my grandfather. In fact, the very few stories I had about my grandfather were either him being illiterate but able to work through the Great Depression, or his service during World War I. And one of my father's best friends growing up was a West Point grad who, even though they disagreed on just about everything politically, they were best friends, and I learned a lot about what service meant to him. And so, you know, no one ever told me, they didn't call it service, they just told stories. It was just stories that I heard when I was a kid. And so, you know, growing up in a, say, solidly lower middle class household, but I was comfortable, had I think a great childhood. You know, being the child of an immigrant and then of someone who came to this country with nothing, felt like, you know, America and the American idea gave me a great life to start. And so then as I started exploring what I wanted to do, when I was in high school, I was not paying attention in class. I didn't always make good decisions. But, you know, and one of the announcements was, hey, you know, our congressperson is accepting applications via congressional page. And I was like, oh, it's a good way to get out of Tucson, Arizona, where I was from, for a little bit. So I applied, was selected as the alternate, so didn't go for a semester. And then I think one day in the middle of December, my junior year of high school, got called to the principal's office, luckily for not something bad that I did, and said, hey, you know, Congressman Colby's on the phone. And I was like, for what? and I remembered, like, last year I applied to this thing, and he said, hey, my page decided she didn't want to spend the whole year there. Can you go to DC in 2 weeks? And I said, sure. And so I went home, told my parents, I just said, I'm going to DC in 2 weeks. They were luckily very supportive. We had to go buy a suit, which I didn't have. And I spent my second semester junior year of high school, I kind of gave up baseball and basketball, which I was playing, which was a big deal, to go live in DC and kind of figure out what people did on Capitol Hill. And, you know, it really changed my idea of what types of service can be. So not just military, not just the volunteers that I knew growing up doing different things, but public service in the elected sense. And this was in the late 90s. And so politics were still, you know, I mean, politics have always been rough, but they were getting rougher. But even then, I saw a lot of the people that ran, that were in office for the right reasons, got to spend every day on the House floor talking to these elected officials and just learning about what they cared about, why they were in it. And back then, still the vast majority of them were in it or got into it for the right reasons. Not all of them were still in it for the right reasons, but just to hear their stories was really impactful for me. And when I was looking at what I wanted to do for college, I think based on the stories I was told as a child, I always wanted to serve in the military somehow. And so I ended up applying to the Naval Academy went to the Naval Academy, and then didn't really know what I was getting into. I hated it for my first couple of years. Didn't understand what the military was about, but don't like quitting things, so I pushed through. Ended up becoming a submarine officer. Spent the beginning of my military career as a submarine officer, and then toward the end, my last job in the Navy was going back to the Naval Academy to teach the Introduction to American Government and Constitutional Development, the required class for all plebes, all freshmen. So had to figure out a way to teach that class, which everyone takes, but in a way that was meaningful to me. So I spent a lot of time during that class within what I was allowed to do with the customization of the class, focusing on civil rights, civil liberties. Those two sections were the most meaningful to me. And trying to come up with lots of stories and activities that made it meaningful to the midshipmen, because it's one thing just to teach about, what the Bill of Rights is and what, the Constitution says, but really, I think trying to make it meaningful to the midshipmen was important to me. And then I got out of active duty then. I'm still a reservist, but left active duty to be an entrepreneur. Did that for a couple years and just kind of kept feeling a pullback. So I went to work for the government, for the Department of Energy, for a couple of years. And I've always had this push-pull between doing something entrepreneurial. I'm just naturally entrepreneurial, and then also doing something which is more service-focused. And being in public service is also very entrepreneurial. It's just a different bent. And so, so I went back from the government back into the private sector to another startup. But after the 2016 election, I was feeling like this pull back to do something more service-oriented. However, I was, one of the first few employees at this company. We had grown by that point to about 50 people, so it was really hard for me to leave. I felt like I owed them something as well. But so, trying to figure out what could I do on the side. Could I run for city council? Could I run for school board? But all that takes a lot of time. And so a fellow Naval Academy grad who I knew through some friends started this organization called Veterans for Responsible Leadership. He started it in the wake of the Michael Flynn scandal. And the initial charge of that organization was to try to elect, it was a nonpartisan organization, try to elect people from both sides of the aisle who shared the ideals that we did as veterans. Not necessarily veterans, but people who shared those ideals. And so I joined that organization quickly, decided to take a more active role there, became the vice president with Dan. It was an interesting organization. It was started as a 527, which is a super PAC for those of you who are aware of it. So even though we were nonpartisan, it's very political, right? You're in the nitty-gritty, dirty weeds of politics. And so as we recruited people to join the organization, going into 2018, 2020, we tried our best to stay nonpartisan, but also ended up getting grouped into very partisan leading groups. And over time, people would come in and out of the organization who we think shared our values, but didn't also like the messiness of politics. And so going into 2020, as we were looking to the future, we wanted to see what the organization could do that not only was nonpartisan, but that could retain some of the people who wanted to be involved in politically oriented things, but not get involved with elections, in partisan elections. And so we spun off a group called We the Veterans. We the Veterans is a 501c19, which is a veteran service organization, really with two main things in mind. One is to combat veteran extremism through education outreach, working with other organizations that combat extremism of all kinds, with especially a focus on veteran extremism. And the other was to support democracy. And the most tangible way that we've been able to see that so far is through the Vet the Vote campaign. People really, when they sign up for something, or when they sign, so we reach about 60,000 people through our organization. We have one paid staff member. Everyone else is a volunteer. What we discovered with our last organization is people want something to do, and if they give you their email, they want to be put into work that's meaningful. And we've tried lots of different ways to do that. We started doing local chapters. We started doing other volunteer initiatives. But that all gets very complicated, especially when it's a group of volunteers. But it was really easy to say, the thing you can do is put your name on this form, sign up to be a poll worker, and we'll call you when we need you. And we found that approach, we've gotten a lot more people engaged. We've gotten a lot more people on our list, and we're hoping that we can keep contributing people to the Vet the Vote campaign. And then as we grow, as people feel more ownership of that initiative, hopefully expand to doing other democratization and democracy-facing activities. And again, this is all as volunteers, so we're all doing this on the side. So it's a very sort of different level of investment, but not everyone is able to give up, to change their careers or give up their family life or whatever it is. And so we'll take what we can get. And if it's 1 day a year, all day long, that's still a heavy commitment. But it's enough to start. And then, as all of our other speakers have mentioned, and as our keynote speaker mentioned, the joy that you feel serving others tends to be enough reward for anyone, and more rewarding than most other things people are doing either professionally, or basically everything other than family and maybe in religion in their cases. And so we're hoping that by tasting that experience of service and what it feels like, that can imbue into them some of the joy and the principles of service for other efforts that they might choose.
Thanks very much. Glenn, let me ask you this question. If somebody out here or in our audience has been motivated to get involved in the Vet the Vote campaign, what can they do? Like, is there a website they can go to? How do they get involved?
Yeah, so they can go to, I'm not going to get the URL right, so just Google Vet the Vote or Google We the Veterans, and then you'll get to the website. You follow us on Twitter for We the Veterans. We routinely will post stuff on Instagram and Twitter about Vet the Vote. And sign up. It's one form. Once you're on our list, we know like I said, we know where to find you, and you'll get information about that. And we don't spam inbox. We're not like a political organization where you're gonna get like 3 emails a day asking for money. We don't really do that. We just tell you, hey, here's how you sign up in your jurisdiction. Here's where they need poll workers. If you happen to have language skills, Spanish, Portuguese, depending on where you are, we do maintain a record of that, so making sure that we can get people that have special skills, language, IT, computers. As many of you know, there's a lot of electronics involved in a lot of voting these days. So different things where you can help people, basically help people vote, help people perform the duty that they want to do and may not always be equipped to do, but they're out there because they want to perform their civic duty. So we would like to make sure people can do that.
One thing that I did not serve in the military, but I did serve in the United States Department of Justice for a number of years. And one of the things I've heard a few of you talk about is serving in the government, whether it's local government, national government. And Glenn, you had served at the Department of Energy, which is a wonderful institution. I've sued the Department of Energy several times in private practice, but it is a great institution. And just get your thoughts on having veterans think about serving in government after their military service is concluded.
I think serving in government, especially as a civil servant, it's a very rewarding position. I think a lot of people, they think of government as this like giant bureaucracy of where their tax dollars go. But in most agencies that I was exposed to, I worked a lot of intergovernmental agency work when I was there. The people that sign up to be civil servants, in most cases, could make much more money in the private sector, have much more job flexibility. But they're doing it because they feel like they're contributing to making the country better. And in a lot of cases, the foremost experts in whatever the field that they're in at the various agencies are at those agencies. Again, because they care about the work, not necessarily getting rich off of it. And so, for veterans who have left the military service, if they want that same feeling, it's a little bit different. So I work. I'm new in a new field now. I work in the healthcare sector, and that sector has some of the same sort of mission, like day-to-day, like mission feeling as it did when in the military. So federal service, unless you're in certain departments, doesn't necessarily always feel like that. But do feel like you're contributing because of the work that you're doing, you can see it, on Main Street. You can see it if you're at DOE. You can see it in the, the utilities that go up. You can see it when solar panels go up, or depending on if you're in Department of Transportation, you can see it when, new funding goes to rail lines, or when, new highways get completed or fixed. So I think that if you like seeing, if you like feeling like you're doing something for more than yourself and you don't have the appetite to take on electoral politics, it's a good option.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah,
Larry?
please.
I had the privilege of working the decennial census in 2020, which got stopped short for a little bit, and then we got back in action. I worked in my community, and then I was assigned to neighborhoods in Philadelphia, and the opportunity to engage with local citizens on this really important effort, I found really fascinating and incredibly fulfilling. So I worked for the Census Bureau for a little bit for the decennial, and I came back to the Census Bureau a little while later working on the American Housing Survey. Census Bureau has a number of surveys that they do. Housing is every other year, American Community Survey. But just being in the communities was just a really engaging opportunity for me. And those surveys have start times and peaks, and then they finish up. And so if someone were interested in serving in government for a time period, the Census Bureau has that opportunity.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think, I've known other people who've worked on the census who've found it a really rewarding experience. I can tell you this, that as a lawyer, if you sort of run into the thing that the councilman said, where you feel like maybe you're not contributing in the best way you can, but working for the government, whether it's the federal government at the Department of Justice, or state government in attorney general's offices, or city government, it's in the DA's office, it's a wonderful experience. I will tell you, there's nothing quite like the experience of going into court and going in as a representative of a government agency. It's a great feeling, and you get a respect you definitely don't get when you're in private practice. So that is a great point. Several of you have mentioned sort of an overlap between service and faith. And I wanted to just ask any of the panelists who want to address that, how that has manifested itself for you, and how you think it can help veterans in particular who are interested in becoming engaged, that overlap of being in the military, but also being a person of faith, and how that really motivates you.
Is it okay?
Yeah, sure.
So much like the general, I felt the call at a very young age, but I didn't really know it. So I was 8 years old, and I lived 2 doors down from the church, which happened to be the same school that I went to. And so I spent a lot of time with the Catholic priest. And so for quite a while, I was thinking to myself, I'm going to grow up to be a priest. And so senior year of high school, I had 3 brochures in front of me: West Point, the seminary, and the school that I went to. And so the decision process became pretty simple. I found out after a little bit of research that priests are not allowed to get married. I was like, oh, no, I need to get married. I want to have kids. Nope, game changer. But ministry was still in my head. I was like, God will work it out. There will be a way for me to get into ministry at some point in the future. I'll just trust. And West Point, I said, again, I really want to have a relationship with a girl, and I just felt in my heart that that was going to happen when I got to college.
Careful, Paul.
So I got to college, and I met the girl of my dreams, so that was great. And so I went to the school where I was able to live out both aspirations, right? So I went and got my degree in management information systems and met the girl of my dreams, and at the same time while I was there, I was able to pursue ROTC. So all throughout my college career and throughout my entire military career, I was very deeply engaged with my faith. Much like what the general said, every single location that I went to, I made best friends with the chaplain. And I was very, very much engaged with what was going on in the faith community, either at the chapel, if I was stationed at a base where had an active chapel community, or at the local church. And at one point, in the beginning of my career, when I was first starting to figure things out, I went up to a lieutenant colonel who was the base chaplain, and I said, "Sir, how do I grow up to be a guy like you?" And he grew up to be the chief of chaplains one day, but his remarks to me was, "Well, right now, And you can't grow up to be a Catholic chaplain because you're married. And so, nope, that's out. And then he said, and even if you change over to the dark side, which he was referring to Protestantism, even if you change over to the dark side, well, there's this whole approval process and many, many steps that you have to go through. And right now, you're a brand new second lieutenant. I would recommend you just learning about the Army and, being a good officer and cutting your teeth. And, again, God will work things out. Okay. Towards the end of my career, I landed in New Jersey, and there was a church there called Kingsway, and I was invited to participate in this program called Leader Step. And it rekindled everything that I had ever felt about faith and ministry and da-da-da. And I went up to the pastor, I was like, I need more. This program is over, but I need more. And he said, well, the next logical step is start taking classes for ministry. Okay? He said, do that, I'll help you with it, I'll mentor you, I'll shepherd you, and if you like it, then we'll take next steps. So it was a 3-year process for me, and there's a lot that goes into it, but for me, it's always been faith and country. Those two things are interwoven. And so many of the organizations that I'm in, the things that I do, again, those two things are interwoven. So to me, they're inseparable, right? And even the pin that I have on here, if you look at it closely, it's a cross and a flag, just symbolizing the idea that they're interwoven. So for me, it's always about God and country. And eventually, God did work it out. When I retired from the military, I got my ministry credentials, and I was able to do a whole lot more. But it's all about faith. And God is never, ever, ever late. He's always on time. His timing may not align with what you think. And when you say to God, hey, I have this plan, he laughs. That's funny, you think you have a plan. Trust in my plan. So that's my story.
And so people who are interested in that overlap, who are veterans, for example, who are interested in doing things that combine their service with faith can join organizations like the ones you're involved with and others to become more involved in that.
Absolutely. In any chapel, in any church, regardless of you are a veteran or still serving, there are ways that you can get after it. There's the Knights of Columbus. It's just one off the top of my head. Within my chapter of AUSA, I'm the chapter president. So I get to incorporate faith in a whole lot of things that we're doing in our chapter. And there's a whole lot of other VSOs, veteran service organizations, that incorporate God and country. So again, going back to my previous point, find out what your giftings are, what you're wired to do. And there's so many different organizations where you can go and get after it. And there's so many different things that incorporate God and country.
Anybody else on the panel want to take that?
Yeah, I just want to take it at a slightly different angle.
Sure.
So I'm not a religious person. My father was a secular Jew. My mother is a devout Buddhist, and I married into a giant Catholic family who are very Catholic. But I spend a lot of my time at my last job and this job working with faith-based communities. A lot of what we did at my last company and what I do now is trying to do more traditional community organizing, trying to reach underserved communities, and the best way to typically do that is through communities of faith. And what I find is that the call to service and showing that you're willing to be a servant leader, which is important in pretty much every religion that I'm aware of, is enough to sort of, I mean, most religions are very welcoming anyway, but having that extra ability to speak to your own call to service, your own desire to be a servant leader for whatever you do, is a way to work amongst communities of faith, even if you don't share either that background or even the religion at all. And so, as veterans who may not come from faith-based backgrounds, I wouldn't let that dissuade you from being involved in service-oriented things that do touch religious organizations, because I think that the same ethics that guide most of us also guide all the major religions that I'm aware of.
Steve, how are we doing on time? Okay.
I can tell a story.
All right. You want to tell a story? Tell a story.
Yeah, I'm going to tell a story. It's not actually an original story. And I get it wrong, but I'll kind of like fill it in like if I get it wrong, right? A 1,000,000-man army was marching against Israel. And the king was beside himself, and all of Israel with him. This 1,000,000-man army was going to destroy Israel. And so, not knowing what to do, someone said to the king, why don't we go up to our enemy up north and make a deal with them? And together, we will face this 1,000,000-man army. So the king said, oh, that's a good idea. So they sent someone over, and he came back and said, good fortune. I went up, and they said, yes, let us together face this threat that we mutually share. And the king was so happy, and all of Israel rejoiced, because now they're going to face this million-man army. And that night, God came to the king in a dream and said, I was going to give you the victory, but you took this victory from me. You cut a deal with my enemy, and therefore your children shall not inherit the throne. Every time I face something that is beyond my ability to face, I think about that story. Don't cut a deal with the devil. Now, having said that, you would think I'm not a politician. Look, it's all about compromise, reality cutting. Well, maybe, maybe not, right? So I think about that because if you are a person of faith, and not everybody is, and I'm trying to make everybody, but you have something that you've got to reference in your faith, and where does that come from? My faith is not something I've created. It comes from the Bible that I have, the stories that are there. But what tells me is when you are going to face something, you could lose, you could be defeated, but face it. Face it without compromise. People say your job's very hard. I said, well, in a way, it's not hard. It's like Moses. Moses didn't part the Red Sea, God did. Moses had to stand up there and do something, or God wasn't going to part the Red Sea. I'm not going to fix the schools. I'm not going to fix gun violence. I'm not going to fix drug addiction. I'm going to try, but I can't try a little bit. I have to bleed. I have to give it my all. I have to be crushed. And then, when I've failed, maybe God will come in and do his magic, but not if I don't give it my all. And that gives me an ability to continue and continue and to continue with persistence. People would say beating a dead horse, but I don't look at it that way.
Thanks.
Comment on that real quick?
Sure.
I had a pastor tell me a long time ago, to Councilman O's point, you have to work like it depends on you and pray like it depends on God. And I was watching a movie recently, and it talked about a person that was really struggling against adversity. And the premise of the story was they had a farm and all like that, and the person was going out and planning and planning and planning, and the other guy, he said, oh, well, you know what? We're not expecting any rain for a long time. It's been a drought for such a long time. Why are you going out and planting? We're not expecting, there's drought after drought. That's what's in the forecast. I'm preparing for rain because I serve a big God. And so when you, again, work like it depends on you and pray like it depends on God, like Councilman O was saying, God takes care of the rest.
Mo, did you have any further thoughts either on that or on the idea of working 100+% to get what you need to get done?
I actually was thinking Councilman O was going in a different direction because there's a phrase in my mind that it's a good story, but I won't tell it just now. The motto, though, is, I can't do everything, but I can do that. And I think that's important for veterans who may be considering an opportunity to serve. What can I do? I think service is service. In our church, Hank and I are both ministers. He's a lector, and I'm what they call an extraordinary minister of Holy Eucharist. And I served in that role in the St. Michael Chapel in Baghdad, which was a chapel that was staffed by the Air Force Chaplaincy and the State Department. And it mattered to show up on Sunday in dusty boots and be able to serve the community there. It was really very special to be able to serve in that faith community. I also wanted to make sure that folks are aware on the serving as a poll worker it does vary by county. I actually, the first time I served was not in my own precinct, and that was a very interesting experience. And then got kind of landed at at my precinct, where I would normally vote, and the judge of elections is actually a former State Department Foreign Service officer. So he and I have these great conversations. And when I first got there, you know, they kind of did the math and they realized, okay, so I'm one of the only Republicans in the room, so they made me the minority inspector of elections. And that's a really important counterpart position in Montgomery County. And when you actually, I ultimately did run for elected, that it is an elected position. I was in it as a volunteer initially, but then ultimately was elected into it. Montgomery County is very, you know, clear about, oh no, minorities just means you got fewer votes. Okay, yes, it means I'm a Republican in a very Democratic county. But it is a wonderful balance of power in that polling place. And the checks and balances are clear, and the opportunity to serve my local community is just so rewarding. So yeah, vet the vote, man. I happen to be, as I put in my application to serve, or to run, I happen to be working for the Census Department American Housing Survey, and as a supervisor, and so I was onboarding a bunch of new people, and I kept reading that Hatch Act flyer that you're supposed to give out, and at one point I went, oh, you're not allowed as a federal employee to run in a partisan election. And I went, oops. So I called the attorney, and they, oh my goodness, they hemmed and hawed about that for weeks before they finally got back to me and said, yeah, you have to choose. You can't, you know, work for the census and serve as the minority inspector of election in your precinct. And I said, you know, voting's just too close to my heart. And I left the Census Bureau.
All right, well, we're almost out of time. Why don't we take some questions from the audience, and we have our microphone bearers here. Does anybody have any questions? Questions? Comments? Insults?
Can I throw out two
Yeah,
more?
sure.
You know, we've talked a little bit about veteran service organizations. The
Yeah.
VA regionally will have what they call community veteran engagement boards, and the one here in the Delaware Valley Veterans Consortium, is terrific. It's 130 different VSOs that all come together to provide services. So, you know, if there's someone out there who would like to get involved in a veteran serving organization, you can go to one of those CVABs and see who's out there and doing good work in the community. The other thing is, you know, the internet is magical, and you can find all kinds of things that are going on. Find your civic association and get involved very, very locally. Go to phlcouncil.com and why, you know, Tuesday mornings, those meetings are broadcast, and you can sign up to speak your piece if you're here in Philadelphia. Just lend your voice.
Yeah.
And if I could do a quick shameless plug, if you're a veteran, service member, or a family member thereof, part of the Army family, the Greater Philadelphia chapter of AUSA would love to have you as a member. So we do 4 major events per year and 4 supplementary events per year. What I mean by that is there's another organization that's doing an event, and we help run that and we participate in that, but it's not our show. We just kind of come alongside and help. And then there's a whole lot of other pop-up events during the year run by other nonprofits and VSOs where we participate and we sponsor and we want to participate, but you know, we're not a headline or anything at all like that. So I would love to have you as part of our AUSA chapter. It's a great organization, and we have a golf outing on the 13th of October. So our whole point with that is to raise money so we can help more veterans, service members, and their families. In the last 2 years that I've been chapter president, we have raised over $5,000 just among our board to help. There was one, she was a single mom, and she had 3 kids. And without our help, she would have not had any kind of Christmas at all for her family. And so just within our board, we took up a very large collection and got her entire Amazon wish list. And there was another family, there was a service member, and he had significant physical disability. He had stroke and just a whole lot of different things. And so because of that, he wasn't getting paid, and his significant other, she wasn't working. She had legal blindness and just a whole host of other things. So again, we took up a collection, worked with a whole bunch of other nonprofits, and provided them physical relief, financial relief, and a whole lot of other things. So there's a whole lot of other organizations, to Mo's point, including AUSA.
Thanks. And I would just make a final point that even if you're not a veteran, but are interested in becoming engaged
in civic activities. There are all kinds of organizations, many of the same organizations that were talked about here, and other organizations that you can become involved in, whether it's political organizations, service organizations. The point is be engaged. As we say at First Amendment Voice, citizenship is not a spectator sport. Get involved. Just find what you like, what your gifts are, as the panel explained, and just get involved. And it will be extremely rewarding to you. The more you get involved, the more you serve in any capacity, the better. We've got some question back there.
Thank you, everyone on the panel, for a fascinating discussion about civic engagement. My name is Joe Cohn. I am with the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE. We're very proud to be sponsoring today's event. And I think a lot of what's on Americans' minds is about the polarization that we're experiencing. We had a question about that to the last speaker. And I'm wondering if any of you have thoughts on how veteran civic engagement can help take the national temperature down. And do you think it can? And if so, how does it play a role in doing that?
Well, I'll give the first shot at that. I think so. I think what's happened is that we went through a very unsettling time with COVID, the George Floyd riots, reactions, things like that. Okay, that's happened, but it also happened at a time where there's an explosion, that's my word, I'm an old guy, of social media. And so people now finding that if you make a statement, like you just make a statement, you read something in a reputable magazine or a professional, journal, and you make a comment, and all of a sudden you got like 300 people attacking you. You didn't read this report. You should have checked this. Why are you reading this magazine? And people were shocked. And then to hear about people getting fired, it has had a tremendous chilling effect. And so this side will come out with a very clear, passionate, absolutely, we are absolutely correct when we say this. They are 1,000% wrong. In fact, they're more than wrong. And they'll do the same thing. And a lot of people kind of watch that and don't want to get involved in that. It's like crazy, right? And so, unfortunately, we've had a chilling effect on just the freedom of expression, ideas, the idea that I don't really know. I'm just making a comment. I'd love to hear some feedback. I'm not, by posting this article, say I agree with it. I'm just saying, like, this is interesting. Is there any comment? And I think that will happen, this chilling effect, this polarization, until people start getting comfortable with the idea of commenting, and when someone makes a ridiculously personal, horrible attack, just saying, hey, that's uncalled for. Just until we get some normalization of regular folk back into the conversation through this new thing of ours, social media. I've got Facebook. I've got two. I got Twitter. I got Instagram. I have yet to do TikTok. It's just a foreign world, right? In other words, just the different many ways, and these people are on TikTok, these people are on Instagram, this is what you do on Facebook, don't do that on Twitter, type of thing. It's very complicated for a lot of folks. We don't really want to do it, but for young people, this is how it is. This is not like something they got to learn. And so I'm being left behind. The speed of communication, the method of communication, the communication technology, unless I become engaged with those technology tools, and I want to talk with people, and in my position, I must. So I do think as veterans, some of our older veterans from the Vietnam War, let's say, Korean War, they're not, some of them are and some of them aren't, but almost every one of our younger veterans is fully engaged in this. And now we have this separation. The common thing is we're veterans, but we have a very different pool of information and communications. And I hope that as everyone kind of shakes off the shock of what's happened and just starts engaging again with your constitutional right to express yourself, And if I dare say, what when I was a little boy is called rugged individualism, just the idea that you could be you and, that's all you really need. And I think veterans, from their standing and their service and their platform, can be a very leveling influence in our nation.
Yeah, there's a gravitas there, and I would just say two things real quick and then turn it over to the panelists. One is, we are planning an interpretive dance workshop for those who want to use TikTok. And secondly, that's kind of what First Amendment Voice is about. One of our missions is to try to encourage civil discourse about societal issues and rational approaches to things. And we have a lot of veterans in our community, and I think they bring that gravitas, that accomplishment in some way, that neutrality in some way that helps foster those discussions.
I'm just going to follow on the gravitas piece, because I think some of the skills and experience that veterans bring to a conversation are representation and also advocacy. Social media is tough because you get headlines. You don't get 7 paragraphs. And even if you're presenting in person at a commissioner's meeting, you get 3 minutes to speak your piece. But I do think that you think back on our military experience and the idea of standing with poise and using your voice to say in an articulate manner what you need to say, especially if you're advocating, I'm thinking of a sergeant who's trying to, get some, maybe a day off for one of his guys. There's an advocacy piece that we learn in the military, speaking to authority, and asking for things that we think are justified. I also think that representation piece is important, that, to be able to say, I live in this community too. My views are a little different from yours, but can we speak with regard for one another? And I think that's a veteran piece of that, is to be representatives.
One of the things that I really love about veterans and being a veteran, there's all kinds of research that shows veterans are one of the few professions that are trusted and beloved. There's a whole lot of other professions that are either not trusted or are declining on the trust level in terms of propensity of trust.
Like lawyers. Go ahead.
I didn't want to say it, but okay.
Lawyers and politicians.
So, 1, veterans are trusted. 2, again, there's all kinds of research that shows when you hire a veteran or you work with a veteran, there's a certain standard that comes with that because of the way that we're trained. And 3, there's also a perception and maybe even an understanding that veterans are leaders because of the way that we're trained. And so I read an article just this morning. There was a devotional, really, that came to my email, and it talks about you can't control what other people say to you. I mean, going to the question of, polarization and divisiveness. You can't control somebody else's reaction or what they say to you. You can control your own comments and reaction. And so are you going to be a very hard wall such that when somebody says something to you that may not be very nice, their comments are going to bounce off very hard and come back at them very hard? So just, escalation, bouncing back and forth? Or are you going to be a soft, maybe a mattress even, where you just absorb those comments, let it roll off your back, and respond to that person with love? Listen, I'm sorry if I offended you. I don't know what I said or what I did that ruffled your feathers, but I love you, I'm praying for you, and I just want to come alongside and work with you. And can we find a way to work together to achieve some common goals?
Glenn.
I'm not as optimistic. If I thought the answer was no, I wouldn't be here. So I think that it's a strong maybe. We identified the veterans extremism issue as something that we wanted to focus on in 2018. And despite what we tried to do and the alarm we tried to raise amongst our community, still a disproportionate number of the insurrectionists on January 6th were veterans. So I think we have a lot of work to do in our own community. I do think that one of the things that I really appreciate about being a veteran is that I was forced to be amongst people that I may disagree with politically, that come from different backgrounds, that I would consider friends that I have put my life on the line for, and they've put their life on the line for me, and that bond is real. And so there's a door, if we choose to take it, to have that more civil dialogue with people that we disagree with because we have that shared background. But a smaller and smaller percentage of our population has served. And so can we, with that 1% or so that does have a service background, can we be a strong enough voice? And I think the only way we can do that is if we get our house in order first. So I'm not saying we don't do it in parallel and try to have veterans speak up. I mean, that's why I'm here. But we have a lot of our own issues to work out around disinformation within our veterans community, around social media within the veterans community, as well, also the veteran spouses. These are very insular world sometimes, especially in certain communities like Special Forces or other communities that tend to be more isolated from the rest of the society or the rest of the military. So there's this sort of two fronts in this fight. One is the broader discourse, which is very important, which I think veterans should be a part of. And the other is within the veteran community itself of trying to keep down extremism.
Yeah. All right, well, I think we are out of time, but I want to thank this wonderful, wonderful panel for these great insights. I want to thank all of you, and please proceed with engagement and love. Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful. It was really great.
good friend, Jim Flynn, and he told me I should tell you he's from Newark, New Jersey, so right next door, but the president of Global Peace Foundation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to be here at the National Constitution Center with each of you and participating in this very important national symposium of First Amendment voice. I'm asking Steve to stay with me here for a moment, and I'm going to ask Larry Rosenberg to join me on the stage for a special presentation before I give a few remarks to introduce this panel.
So before we start the next panel, we wanted to take a few minutes to honor Steve Miska, our wonderful executive director. Steve, as some of you may know, has had a tremendous history of service in the military, and since then, Steve, when he wants to do something, puts his all into it. As the last panel said, put 100% or more, and Steve does that. It reminds me of a comment by that great sage of knowledge, Groucho Marx. I would never want to join a club that would have me as a member. And thinking about that, Steve decided to start his own club with Global Peace Foundation support, and First Amendment Voice has come out of that. And we owe just a tremendous debt of gratitude to Steve. Because of his tremendous commitment to service, Steve has been asked to go back into a service at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and Steve will be leaving First Amendment Voice in the relatively near future to do that. And it's only because of a tremendous commitment that he has to veterans and to the veteran community, and because of the importance of the mission that he's going to undertake. And so we wanted to give him an award for his tremendous service to First Amendment Voice. We really wouldn't exist as an organization without him, and we thank you so much. Thank you. We should probably throw them over with
I'll get in the middle. So anyway, anybody got it? Cell phone. Okay, cool. All right, thank you.
Dance routine? No. Okay.
So I do want to add a few words to that. We're having this important discussion at a very important time in our nation's history, and I hear First Amendment Voice is leading this way. Steve mentioned that this is the 7th symposium. So a good number of years ago, out of concern for the challenges first facing our nation, then we began working with Steve. Global Peace Foundation incubated what became First Amendment Voice. And I just want to say on behalf of my colleagues at Global Peace Foundation that we have greatly appreciated Steve's commitment, his leadership, his dedication to the nation and to our people to live up to our founding ideals. And so we're very proud of the work that has been established with First Amendment Voice, and I think this work, Steve is going to serve the nation in a much larger way, but we will carry on this work, support this work, all of us together, because we the citizens have a lot of work to do to protect our freedoms. The First Amendment Voice tagline, if you will, of citizenship is not a spectator sport reminds me also of an earlier one that Steve used about owning your liberty. And so we do know that the First Amendment guarantees our most important rights as citizens. And so the work of First Amendment Voice is extremely important. I find it interesting that the actual First Amendment is very, very concise. It really struck me as interesting that there are only 45 words in the entirety of the First Amendment. And yet that First Amendment guarantees our most fundamental rights, 5 of them: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to the right of assembly, and the freedom to petition to the redress of grievances to our government. Very fundamental freedoms. What's also interesting is the First Amendment is about what the government must not do, right? It doesn't speak to what the citizens should do. And that's why organizations like First Amendment Voice are so important. Because if we own our liberty, and if we realize that citizenship in a country that seeks to be genuinely an inclusive society of free people, then our participation is needed always. The one final couple of points I want to make is when I always have an opportunity to be here at the National Constitution Center, I'm reminded how auspicious this stage is and this place is because of how auspicious that history is. And what was founded more than 2 centuries ago was an experiment, as the theme of this symposium notes. And that experiment is a work in progress, always a work in progress. And each generation and each era faces new challenges, but also new opportunities. And it is incumbent on us to engage and to work together to make a more perfect union. I thought it was extremely fitting that the beginning of today's forum began with President George Washington's farewell address, excerpts from that, very poignantly reminding us that he worried about this union and would this union survive. I thought it was also very touching and meaningful that we heard from another general today speaking to the issues that face us in this nation, and likewise the challenge for us to work together to realize our founding ideals and lift up the better elements of ourself. And so the Constitution offers an extremely important frame. I firmly believe that the Declaration of Independence provides the vision statement for this nation, especially in its second paragraph, where it explains, or where it affirms we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with unalienable rights. And so what the government must not do is to interfere with those fundamental rights endowed to each and every human being by the Creator, God. And so it is also, I think, fitting and important that in the First Amendment, the first 16 words of the 45 deal with freedom of religion. And so that's the topic of this panel and this discussion. And it's also interesting to me that the word conscience is not in the First Amendment, but it's our conviction actually that the first freedom is freedom of conscience and religion, right? Because most fundamentally, the most important freedom is within each and every one of us. The choices we make, the decisions we make, and that is most fundamentally about our conscience. And so this discussion, I believe today is very important. I really appreciate that this symposium is also connecting with and focusing in on the important contributions that our veterans have made, not only through their service to the nation, but their ongoing service, and that they can be a critical part as we join together in working to uplift our nation and to focus in on what we the people can and must do so that our nation and our freedoms can be preserved. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion led by Dr. Murray.
Thank you very much, Jim. And this being the last panel, I figure we can make this a little more interactive, so each of our speakers will run out to the audience, grab one of you, and do a little hokey dokey, come back up here, and we'll do something else, right? Keep you all energized. But in all seriousness, it's good to wrap up this afternoon's session to talk about something that, when it comes to religious freedom, and I was glad to hear on the last panel talking about how do you live your faith. And I think one of the most important things, especially with the Global Peace Foundation, and I see with First Amendment Voice Alliance, is that we don't choose a religion, and as Jim had mentioned, it's freedom of religion, belief, and conscience. So we engage with folks that serve a God or serve no God at all, but that space in the public square is open to all people, and we need to make sure that that space is open to everybody in the public square. So whether you serve, have a faith tradition that you hold to or not is not the issue. The issue is that it's protected. And I think, and what's really makes this symposium really unique this year is the focus that we have on military. You know, all Americans who wear or have worn a military uniform should have the same freedoms that they defend. And that's what we're talking about here today, because they sacrificed their lives so that we can have these freedoms here today. And so when we talk about religious freedom, an active military person or a veteran, how are they treated because of their faith? Are there any things that hold them back, or that where government encroaches on their rights as a chaplain or as an active military person? There are all kinds of stories that are out there on where you see this infringement. And so we want to make sure that those are protected. And so having this kind of conversation this afternoon, I'm glad to have three unique panelists with us today. And what's exciting about this group here is that they really come from diverse backgrounds. At the very end, I have Reverend Dr. Nathan Walker. He's president of the 1791 Delegates. So good to have you with us. Then we have Simran Stupanagel, who is the president of Sikh Forb, and also serves as vice chairman for the International Religious Freedom Secretariat with us, representing the Sikh community. And then we have Teal Ellington, who serves the American Muslim Veterans. Thank you. Thank you. I know I was going to get it right some way, but I figured I'd just let you do it. So it's really good to have this different kind of perspectives from each place. So what I'd like to do is have each of you do a little introduction of yourself. I was going to read everyone's bios, but I liked what Larry did with his group, and let you each share a little bit about yourself, and then talk about military and religious freedom and where that stands for you. And then we'll do some Q&A and then wrap up. So let me start with you, Teal. Thank you.
Let me greet everyone with Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. Thanks for the opportunity to come here. The First Amendment is all our inherent rights, no matter what. A little bit about myself. I go to Masjid Muhammad here in Philadelphia. Also, I have the distinct opportunity to serve the military while I was not a Muslim. And I feel as though the religious freedoms there and the First Amendment was upheld because you had to go to church every Sunday. And that was your opportunity to get out of work when you go here. But I took my Shahada in 2007, so I'm getting to see there is no difference of how we treat it. And I, just by talking to you and studying the Quran, I think the forefathers had the Quran in hand, because the Bill of Rights, the first Constitution, is set the groundwork for everything. And then when I look at the Quran and I see in the Quran freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom, inherent rights. So with that in mind, we look at the Quran, we look at the Constitution, and you look at the Uniform Military Justice Code. Those are the standards of reality, mankind, and the universe. I retired from the military in 2003, and then I retired from civilian life in 2008. So it's been a blessed part to see how working with the government, I know panels before, they talked about from military to the government. So I did 30 years in the government, but I did reserves simultaneous with 2 activation with Desert Storm and Noble Eagle. So I got the opportunity to do stateside activation and not. But if I would have stayed in the military as a first sergeant, I know it was no doubt 6 months later after we did our tour coming back from Fort Leonard Wood, we were activated to go overseas. So my opportunity to get a ribbon for overseas stopped right there. But I work in Philadelphia, or I say work because it seems like it's work. When you retire, you never retire. As I work with Master Muhammad, we do a lot with the feeding. We do a lot with women in shelters. So aspect of treating people with humanity is nothing but the Constitution and First Amendment. And as I go along working around the cities and going to state, it's just the service. And we talked about all day long is the service. But nobody really understands the Constitution or the Bill of Rights until they get in trouble. When they get in trouble or you feel as though your needs and your morals and your values are being upset, then you start going into the Quran. Then you start going into the Constitution. Then you start going to Uniform Military Justice Code to find out, is the government really treating me right? So it's all about educating yourself. And I look back, when you talk about freedom of speech, I look back at, even though Muhammad Ali wasn't in the service, his First Amendment is freedom of speech, all right? And then in the Quran, we have something called there's no compulsion in Islam, and that's freedom of speech as you go around and you detail everything in Islam. But the most important thing is how you treat each other. We lost that. The whole world lost that. But if we can go back and look at the constitutional right and whatever our religious bases are and put them on that level, a lot of this stuff that's happening in the community will stop. Because I feel as though Islam is peace. Most people say, oh, and it's a stereotype. And it shouldn't be a stereotype because I don't fit none of the stereotypes. But if you look at me, I fit all the categories in life in the United States. A woman, a black woman, a Muslim. You can't go wrong with that. You definitely can't go wrong. And in our religion, the women is held at the same big status in Islam, so you can't deny us. And I know you just heard the story about the sister that just got killed for her covering. That wasn't Islam. That was basically people cultural. Yeah. So when you look at religion and you look at Islam and you look at the First Amendment, you gotta make it not cultural. You gotta keep it in the standards of governing, ruling over it. And just looking at the First Amendment, it just opened my eyes and renew everything in me that we can get better in all our regulations, all our stereotypes, all our moral values, if we just go back to the Constitution of the Bill of Rights. Treat you right, you can speak. Whether we disagree or not, we should have a common goal to say, we understand, but I'm not just going to go ahead and shoot you or kill you because you don't understand. If you have the basic right, and you know the press has it too, it's in the Bill of Rights, the press. We can't have that propaganda. We got to know. I know Mo say, I don't want to look at 6, Fox, or whatever. It's the hardcore, because in the Quran, it say, we taught you not what you know not. And we heard that already about the major. You know not, but you know. But do you want to carry out everything you do? From that aspect, we got to move forward. If we get more people in, and like with the voting right, in Islam is a lot of people, a lot of Muslims say they don't want to vote. But in every culture, every aspect, every battle, every type or organization, there is a vote. So with your vote, even though you don't win the vote, you have that right to express that vote, and you pick for that person. And as we go on and we see that Islam set the standards for us to get out, vote, treat people with humanity and everything. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So that's not fair because you get to count all those and I can't. So I know.
Women is the balance of society, no matter which way you leave it. That's why I sat here first.
That's right. Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Walker, I'd like to turn it over to you next.
Well, they say that the greatest gift we can give one another is to be in one another's presence. and it's truly an honor to be in your presence, especially as we gather in such interesting and difficult times. When I think of the pandemic, I think of the weight of the world really falling on the shoulders of families. Really, it was families and young families who all of a sudden had to work at home, school at home, do everything, and there is tremendous pressure. I myself don't have children, but I'm very empathetic to the families who had to carry us through this pandemic to this stage. And military families in particular had an additional, I was about to say burden, but I don't think that is how militaries frame it. It's not a burden, it's a responsibility, and it's a duty, and it's a calling. And so, as someone who is not a member of the military, as someone who is not a parent, I thank you for your service. Thank you for how you are tending to your families in these very difficult times. So with that said, just before the pandemic, I had the tremendous blessing, really, to be able to craft a curriculum for 8-year-olds in the Cub Scouts. And they were in Manhattan, so from all the different boroughs of New York City, they gathered first in Manhattan and then over at a retreat center. And we had the opportunity through our organization, 1791 delegates, named after the year the Bill of Rights was ratified, and the Foundation for Religious Literacy, to train these 8-year-olds how to learn about the First Amendment. How do you teach kids about the 5 freedoms? Well, we did so by putting it in language called the 3 R's. Rights, responsibility, and respect. Everybody has rights. Everybody has a responsibility to protect the rights of others, including those with whom you disagree, and to do so respectfully. Rights, responsibility, and respect. And the reason we were doing this training for these Cub Scouts was because we were creating a patch for them to earn so that they could take it to their teachers in their public schools and hold up their 3 R's patch and say, I'm here to stop religious-based bullying in our school. I am a 3 R's ambassador, and I'm here to promote rights, responsibility, respect. When they went through their initiation ceremony and they were chanting out the 3 R's and they were getting their patches, it was one of the most inspiring things that I've seen in teaching people before. They were so fired up and they were so committed to defend the rights of people other than themselves. Why were we doing this? Because we know through the social hostilities and the increases in violence in America today that religious minorities are experiencing an all-time level of hate crimes. Right? Muslims, Sikhs, Jews, are those perceived to be any one of those are being targeted because of their faith. Their communities are at risk. And through those increases in social hostilities and violence, we felt compelled to counter the illiteracy about religion that breeds such violence, to equip these particular 8-year-olds to take it head on. Why the public schools? Because Muslim families were reporting, 42% of Muslim families were reporting that their children were being bullied in schools. That is double that of Jews and Protestants. This was at an all-time high of religious-based bullying in public schools. Here's the most tragic statistic about that. 1 in 4 of the bullies were the teachers. They were the school administrators. So when all of a sudden, this 8-year-old comes into the classroom and holds up to the teacher, I'm a 3 R's ambassador. all of a sudden, the student becomes a teacher to the teacher and sets a standard right there in that classroom. That type of empowerment is really essential, and it's something that's lacking right now. And I feel like that type of empowerment, that type of work, is something in the DNA of military families. There's a constant commitment to defend the rights of people other than oneself. So it's in this context, if you look at schools and the increased social hostilities and in the political rhetoric and so on, you see some of these trends bleed into the courts. So I'm a minister. I've spent 14 years serving congregations. I'm also a First Amendment educator, a nerd who got my doctorate in First Amendment law. And when I look at the court cases, the results of them, I see these very disturbing trends. Less than 4% of the First Amendment free exercise cases before the courts come from white Protestants. They win 70% of their cases.
Wow.
If you are Native American, Jewish, or Catholic, you bring 30% of the cases, but you only win about 40-ish% of the time. If you're Muslim, you bring far more cases, and you win a third of the time, 33% of the time. I'm saying this because the biases that are infiltrating the school, leading our children to be bullied because of their identities, that's infiltrating the politics and the religious rhetoric, feeding this fear of the suspect minority of the day, is infiltrating into the courts so that it's not a blind and just system, but it's fueled with the same discriminatory ideas that we're seeing in different sectors of society. And this, to me, all comes down to a type of illiteracy, an illiteracy about religion and an illiteracy about the law. So the first thing that comes out of this illiteracy is a lack of understanding of our history. Right now, there are 1% of the American population consists of Muslims. What was the population of Muslims at the founding of the country? 5 times more that. There are 5% of the American population at the founding of the country identified as Muslim. 5 times more than today. There has never been an America without Islam. Never. Where did they come from? A vast majority came from indentured slavery. Through the slave trade being brought to the Americas by force, and then through that force being forced to convert to Christianity of different denominations. Others at the founding of the country identified as Muslims who were diplomats, who were working with John Adams, who he himself in a treaty on behalf of the United States Senate that unanimously adopted the treaty, said that there's no character of enmity against any Muslim majority country. Washington, Madison, Jefferson, on and on and on, framers explicitly included Muslims in the First Amendment rhetoric around free exercise of religion, explicitly named Mohammedans and Islamists as ones who were protected by the Constitution. And that history is missing. Because if you were to look at our politics of the day, you would think that somehow Islam is foreign to this nation when it is not. So that illiteracy about our law, about religions, and about history is fueling the divisions that we're seeing today. One of those forms of illiteracy is about the fact of the racial demographics that tie to the illiteracies that I'm speaking about. George Washington, in one of his first acts, signed into law the naturalization law that said that in order to be a citizen of the United States, you had to be a free white person. It took a civil war to take out the word free. A civil war to take out the word free. And through the Civil War and the Reconstruction Amendments, we get a new form of reconstruction of the US Constitution, ensuring equal protection under the law, ensuring that if you are born here, you can be a citizen. But it wasn't until Kennedy's vision of a new immigration system, which he did not get to see, because it was his assassination that led Johnson to formally reform that immigration system, that took out the requirement to be white, to be a citizen. I was born in 1975. I'm of the first generation of Americans to live in America where race was not a prerequisite for citizenship. The first generation in American history to not require race as a prerequisite, a legal prerequisite for citizenship. When that changed, a new generation started to see possibilities that Bhagat Singh Thind did not even get to see in 1920 when he came back from serving America in World War I, a turban-wearing Indian Sikh who came before the US Supreme Court and said, I just served America in war, and when I came back, I'm being told that my citizenship is being revoked. They said, oh, but you're Indian, you're not white, you can't be a citizen. I just served America in war, and I am not seen as dutiful to this country. They said, but you're not white to the common man. That was literally the phrase they used. He said, I am from the Caucasus of India, where the term Caucasian comes from. They said, oh, but to the common man, you are not white. His citizenship was revoked and upheld by the US Supreme Court. Fast forward from there in the 1920s to this new vision that Kennedy casted and Johnson enacted. We get this whole new racial equity when it comes to citizenship. That in itself has fundamentally changed the religious demographics of the United States. And I do think that a lot of the religious liberty conflicts that we are seeing in society today have to do with this unrest still around race that ties into our identities as religious or not. And it is in this context that I feel that the military has a very profound duty to do what it has done throughout human history, through many different civilizations, and particularly in the United States. And that is to show us the way forward. What do we know about the military as an institution in the United States? It was leading desegregation efforts, creating an integrated system beyond the racial categories that you were seeing in civil society. When it came to reform with women and gays, you begin to see different social reforms taking place in the military. Imagine if we did that with religious liberty in the military. There are 2,900 military chaplains. There are only 14 that are Muslim. There are 6,000 Muslim military personnel. They deserve spiritual care. They deserve a country, a military that will serve them in their most vulnerable times of their vocation and in their lives. Especially in a time like this when the whole weight of the world has been on families, and even more so on military families. So I want to close by going back to those 8-year-old kids that I met just before the pandemic, Cub Scouts, having this deep loyalty and commitment to defend the rights of people other than themselves, to prevent religious-based bullying in their elementary schools. When I saw the light behind their eyes and their deep commitment to that work, I saw the spirit of America. I saw the spirit of the First Amendment in action. I saw that liberty of conscience. And now that I'm reflecting on that in this state of where we are in this pandemic, I'm now coming to a different definition of liberty. For my entire career, I have seen liberty as an individual pursuit. Like I'm a Article 18 guy, and this is of the Article 18 of the Human Rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that does affirm freedom of conscience, not just of freedom of religion or belief, but conscience. And I see that as a fundamental right, inalienable right, that is afforded to all human beings across the world, across all generations, across all civilizations. And because I've been in this world of First Amendment, I've always looked to the individual to be an agent of that conscience. But what I'm learning from the pandemic is that I'm beginning to shift my understanding of liberty from an individual pursuit to one of a collective. And what I mean by that is I want to raise liberty to the power of 2, where I not only seek liberty for myself as an openly gay man who is married to an immigrant who comes from a Hindu family. I am not seeking to have a self-centered form of liberty. I am dedicating my life to ensure that right of conscience for that white evangelical baker, for the Muslim military chaplain, for that 8-year-old Cub Scout who's carrying her patch to her public school. And in that way, I'm defining liberty not as independence, but as interdependence. Why? Because your freedoms are intimately tied to my own. And I am not free until you are free. What can be more American than that? I am not free until you are free. It is an honor to be in your presence.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walker. Amen. You know, Dr. Walker, what you mentioned, I've heard Simran Stupanagel mention many times, representing the Sikh communities, the Sikh community. So Simran, why don't you share a little bit about your background and the work that you do and the impact for religious freedom with military and veterans?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody. It's an honor to be on this auspicious stage, and these are incredibly difficult acts to follow. I was hoping you'd say something stupid so that I could kind of come in strong, but that was nothing less than divine, and so many parallels to my life, as you might be able to imagine. Now, my daughters are, on their mother's side, are from a Mayflower family. I myself am born in Germany and grew up in Asia, and moved here. So I have a couple of perspectives on what it means, what a blessing it is to be an American and to live in this society under this Constitution, and the duties and the rights that brings. First of all, when I was a kid in school in Germany,
I was born in Germany.
You were born in Germany? I don't know if I should congratulate you or console you, but A teacher came in, a substitute teacher, and took my turban right off my head and said, "What's that doing in my class?" And that poor teacher had 25 angry German kids to deal with, who all rose to my defense. We're like cats and dogs with each other, but that teacher, boy oh boy, that resulted in an apology in front of half the school and all kinds of drama. But I do remember, as a German kid, the Nazi generation was still about in their 60s then. They kind of just of retirement age. And I knew there was something weird about older people. They seemed more angry, more closed up. They'd send my friends, if somebody's grandma saw me with my friend, they'd say, get out of here. You don't belong here. But I'm Caucasian, actually come from an old German military family. Now, I also knew that I was a Sikh, though, and I started saying to these people, I'm German. This is what we look like now. And it would destroy them right in front of my eyes. And at first, that gave me a sense of power, but then it made me sad. I didn't understand the confusion. Now, I also knew that my first name was Johannes, which is John the Baptist. And Simran was my middle name because the German government at the time wouldn't give a Sikh kid a first name if that kid is Caucasian because that wasn't German enough. I also knew that when I turned 18, there was mandatory military service that I was excluded from because of the way I looked. I also knew that when I married an American and moved to the US, I couldn't serve here either. Because even though we had veterans, American Sikhs in World War I Army uniform, even though hundreds of thousands died or were injured liberating Europe from the Nazis, fighting against parts of my family, actually. Starting with the Reagan administration, we couldn't serve. And that was painful. Now, in the UK, that was different. In the UK, we enjoyed some respect in the armed forces. That's changed now. But I remember talking to a group. Now, I spent about 15 years working for a very large military contractor. As the head of corporate strategy in Washington. I was the VA's Employer of Veterans of the Year for several years, largest employer of retired American police officers. And I knew that if I wanted to engage a general or a senior police officer, or senior civil servant, to talk about security or military contracts, I needed to first lay right on the table why I was an American, why I was a good American. So I really had to get, if I wanted to even get a meeting or get a word in, I had to be very good at defining what it means to be American. One of the first things I can say about that is when I see a veteran and I say, thank you for your service, even though I wasn't allowed to serve, I know you put your life on the line. And what might be even harder than that is risking your time with your family. Either you're deployed or you put your life at risk. You have children that might have lost their mother or father. You didn't see them grow up the same way others did. You did that for my First Amendment right. You did that for my right to be here as a Sikh. So that's what's in my heart, is when I say thank you for your service, I thank you for protecting my First Amendment rights. I wish I had been able to serve as well. I flew from Paris to London to DC once, and I get to have a little fun with this now. In Paris, they had the French Revolution, and they just killed the clergy and the royals right there, and they still sing the praises of those glorious days. The security officer, some of our contracts were security contracts at large U.S. airports, where the TSA's work. The security officer said, "Take that off and put it in the metal detector, or not in the metal detector, in the X-ray machine." And I said, "No, you just have to, wave a wand." And the security guard stepped forward, which, is a threat, and said, "Put it in." And I said, "Well, no, I know my rights under the European Union. By now, I'm pretty versed in this stuff." I said, "No, why don't you get your supervisor?" And they're like, "Oh, damn." And when I got their supervisor, I'm not supposed to say that, Paul. No, you're bishop, but I said it. That's right. I'm sorry.
I go to my supervisor, too.
I apologize to him. That security officer ended up getting in trouble which would be the standard under the European Union usually. Went to London. The screener was a Sikh, and he was like, "Hey," I was like, "Hey, what's up?" He was like, I'm gonna screen all your stuff." I was like, "That's cool. Screen all my stuff." Turban stays on. I get to Dulles, D.C., and the immigration officer looks at my passport, my green card, looks at me. He's trying to figure out what to say, and he goes, "Sir, do you intend to harm this country in any way?" And I said, "How dare you? How dare you, buddy? Because guess what I do for a living? I work for one of the largest security firms in the country, and we protect airports. In fact, you're looking at a Sikh, and we love this country. We love this country and love the First Amendment." And that's all it took for him to go, "Guess what? I'm so sorry, A. B. Don't tell anybody, but I'm going on a top secret deployment to Afghanistan next month. So you and I were on the same team." That's America. You have to educate each other, just like what you're saying. And then we can get along pretty quickly. We have a two-party political system, which is tough. As a European, that's tough, because we have 5 political opinions. We form coalition governments. We have 5 crazy uncles and aunts who talk about whatever they talk about, and everyone's kind of tolerated at Christmas dinner. But here you have 2. And we love the either or. I mean, how can this country be divided along political demographies on virtually every political opinion? You're either one of these or one of those. The common ground is so massive. My favorite, I said this yesterday, one of my favorite videos in the world is where the MAGA marchers met the Black Lives Matter marchers. They started yelling at each other. They realized they're both talking about individual liberties. They realized they both wanted equal access to opportunity, equal treatment before the law, and they started marching together. That is all possible here in this country. And I'm saying that from from the vantage point of somebody who wears a turban every single day and experiences that firsthand. It doesn't matter which side of the issue you're on. If we find common ground, we'll be here together. And the key to that, and this is the work we do at the Religious Freedom Secretariat, is to fight for each other. Many of our religious groups and special interest groups, we're good at fighting for our own issues. If you're in an LGBTQ rights organization, that's what you fight for. If you're in a certain religious group, that's what you fight for. Until we fight for each other, though, that is a difficult path. It's what the Nazis did. They isolated people from each other, then they took them out one by one. If at the beginning of that process, they had stood up for each other, an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. That would have never happened. That would have never happened. We have to do it for each other. I want to give you an example of what happened in Guatemala. We opened at the IRF Secretariat, we opened the first ever interfaith event in Guatemala. And they look at America as a beacon. A lot of places do, but they really do. And they said, we need religious freedom like the United States has it. They'll block migrants from going further north to the U.S. border. They'll stop them right there in Guatemala. That's how passionate they are about it. And I remember saying, not so fast. Do you remember that the great state of Missouri had an extermination order against the Mormons in the 19th century? Mormons had the choice of leaving or being executed, exterminated. It's not part of our history that's talked about so often. Our religious freedom is precious and needs to be protected every day. I know these 3 will be here. If there's a Sikh in trouble, these 3 will be there the next day. There's plenty of trouble for Sikhs. There's plenty of trouble for all of us. Each one of our religious communities is persecuted somewhere in vicious ways, if not somewhere in the country, somewhere in the world. It's our job to go to the weakest among us, even if we don't particularly like them or agree with their ideology, and protect their First Amendment rights. For Sikhs, you have the Taliban, bombed the Sikh Gurdwara, the temple in Kabul. There was a wedding, and then they bombed the funeral procession right after. A couple months later, you're here in the US. There's a shooting at the FedEx Center in Indianapolis. Sikhs got targeted and killed. But in each one of those places, we have allies. And I especially want to thank those of you who worked to get minorities out of Afghanistan after the US withdrawal. There's people who supported our military efforts there who we need to get out. There's Christians there who we need to get out. Try being gay in Afghanistan these days, we need to get them out. Try being a Sikh, try being a Hazara. There's an act of genocide against the Hazara communities. Could any of us say, no, we need to get this one group out? And we need to get all of them out. Sure, you may focus on a group first, but if you do, focus on the adjacent groups too and do it together. The amount of goodwill is for Afghanistan's communities is humbling and touching. We need to do more. And we need to then welcome them here when they arrive and integrate them. And again, protect one another during that process. It's the only way. It's the only way I've seen work. Back to Guatemala, I said that about the extermination order against the Mormons, and a gentleman stood up after and he said, I don't really know what a Sikh is. By the way, we're the 5th largest religion in the world, 30,000 temples, mostly in India. I don't really know who they are, but we just want to thank you. And if any of us, or what I'd said is if anybody messes with the Mormons in Guatemala, the Sikhs will be there to protect them. He said, if anybody messes with any of you, the Mormons will be there to protect you. And then the chief rabbi of Guatemala stood up and said, Shalom means peace. And we're here to protect all of you. This is Jews saying this to a room full of Catholics, evangelicals, massive religions. It's a small group. I remember the Ahmadiyya Muslims who were there, persecuted in their own country. They realized they had protection. They made friends all around, except that they weren't getting persecuted there. But they realized they had so much support. And then Pastor Cash Luna was in tears. He was he has the largest church in Latin America. He was in tears because, his heart opened and he realized that everybody felt what he was feeling, that we're all in this together. That's all I really want to say for now. I'm an advisor to the Sikh American Veterans Alliance, SAVA, and to the Defense Sikh Network in the UK. And I'd love to work with any of you on these initiatives. Who you are and what you stand for is humbling and touching. And how lovely is it to get into a room and realize you have so many friends who you've never met, who have the same heart and the same spirit. So I do have a lot of hope. And thank you for your incredible work.
Thank you very much, Simran. Appreciate that. As we get ready to close this out, if there's any questions, if you would stand up, that would be great. One of the things I want to remind us all is that, the theme for this year's symposium is the American experiment at risk. And when we look at our nation where we are today, and we understand the foundational principles of our nation, it is still an experiment that is ongoing. Yes, I think it was yesterday I was looking, I was never part of the active military. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And yesterday they did the celebration of when John F. Kennedy signed in 1961 for the Peace Corps to be enacted. And when I looked at the picture in the White House, I looked at it and I was looking at it, I'm like, wow, all white men in the White House, and there was one white woman in the corner. And I said, the reason why America is still an experiment is because as we have grown as a nation, so have we as a diverse people. I mean, look at this platform today, the diversity up here amongst us that come from different cultures, different backgrounds, different ideologies. But we all can sit here on this stage and be in alignment and agreement when it comes to our First Amendment principles. And I think that's the most coveted piece that we have here, and we must protect that. Those of you that are in military, when you served in military, Steve, I think of you. Have you, as a person in military, have you ever said, I'm an active military person, but when I come home, I take that off? Do you ever say that? Teal, did you ever say that? No, because that's a part of, as an American in the military, that's a part of who we are. So it is in the faith community. And so often what we find, even in military and the faith community, is that we're being required by government and other institutions that say you have to take that off when you come in here. You can't live your faith as a school teacher. You can't, even as a chaplain in the military, you know, they want to control how you minister as a chaplain. And understanding some of the statistics that you gave, you can understand the diversity within our military and how diverse it is, yet how do we meet the needs? So what the military said is, let's not have you focus on the faith tradition you come from. Just remember, your requirement is to serve everyone. So therefore, they start saying you have to be careful on how you present your faith, or really don't present your faith, but be there accountable to everybody else. So then all of a sudden that brings that whole experiment into a dichotomy of how do we work this? How do I work as a Christian pastor, working with different faith communities and not being able to say amen or thank you, Jesus? You know, so we look at all of this, and I think we have to understand, and it always boils right down to, and that's the work that I love with the Global Peace Foundation, and Jim as our international president, is that in the public square, that is the protected space. And that's for everybody that's in that space, and we have to be very respectful to everyone that comes to that space, and that it's not pushing one agenda or another, but making that the space where community can build together, and doing like Simran said. If anybody messes with a Sikh, you're going to find the Christians and Muslims backing them, and vice versa, and I think that's really important. Any questions as we wrap up? Because then I want to get ready to turn it over to Steve, because I know we have a hard close at 4:45, so we've got 5 minutes left. Any questions or comments? Yes?
I don't want to take up too much time.
Sure.
My name is Chris Purdy, Veterans for American Deals. I have a very challenging question. I'm going to stumble to get it out, and so I hope you bear with me. This was a fantastic panel. I was really grateful to listen to all this. One of the things that I thought coming into this panel, given the religious freedom and veterans discussions that's been happening over the past few years, is COVID and COVID vaccines. And so I am just curious, and again, this is a very challenging question for me to get out, but at what point, so, you know, we know that there were many service members who refused vaccines for religious purposes. And I'm curious people's thoughts on at what point, you know, that religious freedom, when that conflicts with what is perceived as the common good, where is that balance there? And I would just love to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
That's a very good question. That's a $6 million question. If we had that answer, we could have solved a lot of the issues over the past couple of years. But let me turn it over to Teal. Why don't you get first?
Assalamu alaikum to you all again. That's a very topic in Islam about taking the vaccine. You have a lot of us who won't take the vaccine because you don't know what's in it, what's the effects of it. Even though we have doctors to tell us, there's still going to be that fine line where you're not going to take it. In Islam, we have that same mentality. So I know the military from that standpoint, and I wasn't in the military when that came up, but I'm just speaking as a civilian or a veteran, that you're always going to have that underlying when you're not going to take it. Then the military or your job or your organization say, you either take it or lose your job. And then your religious beliefs come in and say, do I want to lose my job and give it all to God? So Islamically, that's how we think. Why should I take it? How will it affect me later? Or is it propaganda? But we know so many people have passed away with COVID, but still we look at our religious faith to see whether is it good for me, what's in effect. And then you have all the other experiments that happen that where people say this was something that man made, or they planned it, or they erased something. But to be the educated guest, everybody look to their religion and see what that basis is for them to take it. There's no yes, no answer, because if the government say you can't come in, you can't come in with a mask. You're not going to put a mask on, right? You're going to put a mask on if you got to go to the store. And we learned that we can work through everything and deal with the different situation. But when you go to Islam, we look at the faith base and what's the effect on us if it's something that we don't believe in, that we can't take in our bodies.
Dr. Walker?
I believe exemptions for rights of conscience create a kind of pressure valve for society where it allows some breathing space. So if you look at why specifically racial minority communities in America were hesitant around the vaccine, it was around the history of government abuse of black bodies, literally, of military bodies being used for medical experiments. I mean, without knowledge of that history and then introducing a kind of coercive act, it re-traumatized generations of communities who didn't have that pressure valve or even just fundamental freedoms. And so, to me, when I look at rights of conscience, I look at the ability to give someone a space to lament, to challenge, to question. And when Rutgers University did that, for instance, it has I think it's something like 30,000 students. And they had, as a state university, had that question of like, okay, should we have different exemptions? And they agreed they should have medical exemptions, and they thought, well, maybe we can have philosophical objections, but how do we do that? And what about religious? How do we manage these three? When it came down to it, when they awarded a process, a fair process for students and faculty to go through that, it ended up that of the 30,000 that were required to come to school vaccinated and masked, it was less than like 120 that actually exercised those exemptions. So if you craft a vision of a government that's non-coercive, that creates exemptions, gives people space to breathe, you'll fundamentally honor a core thing about religion, which is that religions are dynamic. They're internally diverse. They change over time. These are our three premises articulated by by Diane Moore at Harvard University and the American Academy of Religion. Internal diversity. Religions change over time. They're embedded in all aspects of culture. You can't just check your identity at the door.
Right.
And so for me, I believe that these exemptions are very critical for the health of society, the civic health of society, and very, very real. It can be a public health opportunity as well. Because if you give people a fair process to exercise their liberty of conscience, you see that it may not be as dramatic as Twitter might suggest.
Simran, as we close up, did you want to add any final comment to that?
I think those were brilliant words. In the Southwest, we had, the issue of casinos being able to open, but not churches. So I think especially as societal pressure mounts so viciously to be vaccinated, it's important for people to be protected in their own conscience. Obviously, government overreach is a major issue. Obviously, the fear of a pandemic is real. Sikhs tend to be pro-vaccination, but I would say it is absolutely critical for us to protect a vocal minority in their time of need. And if we're not doing that as a society, if we're not creating the exemptions that were discussed here, and if we don't engage in that conversation and respect, we're losing the moment. And it is so tempting. It is so tempting to be divided among the stuff, which is why I think it's especially important for people to live their conscience individually. And the incentives were wonderful. You got lottery tickets, you got beer, you got $100 to get vaccinated. Throw the incentives out, sure, but let people live their conscience to the best of their ability, and I would consider it my job to protect that right.
Very good. Thank you. And a very good question. And that's one of the points that how do you take where the common good for society balances with somebody's individual right. And I know that was the mandate. A lot of questions, even the universities would say, you know, where is the balance there? And I think even as a minister, a pastor of a church, you know, for me, it was always the safety of my congregation was the priority. So we would follow some of the mandates, but coming from a predominantly African-American community, it was a big struggle. I never could understand why the Civil War ever happened until I saw COVID and saw families literally split down the middle and stop talking to each other because one was pro and the other was against, and just how violent people could get, and that's serious there. So that concludes our panel for this afternoon and this American experiment. I'll let you go make one comment, and then Steve, I'm gonna let you come on up and wrap up.
I just want to make one comment. You can see how the First Amendment is now affecting the military. If you know our regulation, everybody in the military, before we always had to worry about whether our hair was coming out or our caps.
Yeah.
So now there's a whole big section on religious artifacts, religious wearing, and everything. And they have pictures in it now. So it's a whole new game because the numbers are changing, because now a lot of Muslims are coming and other religions are coming in. So now the changes are with the First Amendment. From the hair, you can wear your signet, your religious signets, the attire, and everything. So it's changing, but it's coming at the time where people dictates it and where the situation and times are making those changes. So if anybody go in, depending on your religion, or what you have to wear for that religion that you want to be in, and before they, Miller say, if you want it, I'll give it to you. We heard that in the military. If you want that, we'll give it to you. But now the times is changing, the numbers of different religious organizations are coming in. So now it's accommodating and make people freely come into the military. And that's one aspect with Muslim and Islam.
Great, thank you. I think at the end of the day, Dr. Walker has it right. Let's just start training all the 8-year-olds. Steve, come on up. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you to our online viewing audience for tuning in. Thank you to our speakers, our wonderful speakers throughout the day. Thank you all. Thanks to our sponsors, Global Peace Foundation, Veterans for American Ideals, FIRE, the Foundation on Individual Rights and Expression. We are really grateful for your support. If you get a chance, please don't forget to share photos. Take photos with the speakers. If you want to ask them a question privately after the fact, take photos with each other, put them out there, and we would love to be able to promote that. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend here in the wonderful city of brotherly love, Philadelphia. Have a great night.